several questions, or numerous questions. I think we've provided a response this evening. So up there, and I think you have in front of you an agenda, and I hope that all of you received a packet from us, because I know we made 35 copies that we submitted to the township, and that packet would have had the cover letter. Remember, there was a question regarding the ordinance and trying to make the ordinance fit into the development, and that was provided, actually a track change as well as a clean copy. I'll provide comments on that at the end of this presentation. The beginning of the presentation will be Frank Tavani, who will talk about the traffic situation that I know has been a concern of everyone here. As you know, we are dealing with the text amendment to the ordinance and not a land development at this time. Certainly, there's going to be a much more detailed traffic report as part of the land development process as required by your code. But Frank has prepared detailed answers to this and also a summary of the traffic and pedestrian investigation and conclusions that he's performed at the site. We also will go into some of the impervious coverage issues, the current plan institutional zoning. You should have a chart there comparing the current zoning to the proposed zoning, and in fact also an updated chart showing the current zoning, what the amendment has stated prior to the revisions that were recently made to make it stricter and more enforceable regarding the setbacks. At the end of this evening, hopefully that will be ready, the board will be ready to make recommendations to the Board of Commissioners. And I respectfully would request the board do that and make some comments with it as well. So I'll present Frank to talk about traffic and pedestrian study.
Thank you, Nick. Can you give me, this is a newer version than I use. How do you start the slideshow? Yeah. Thank you, Chris, for the help. As you heard from Mr. Cornelia, there are a lot of traffic investigations ongoing. They began, actually, at this point, the better part of a year ago. Excuse me. Just walked up here at the last minute. April Fools, right? I was reviewing some emails earlier today. They go back to March of last year, when conversations with the township staff began regarding the traffic impacts of this proposed or this potentially proposed site plan if zoning does move forward. And I know at the last meeting I volunteered answering some of the traffic questions that were being discussed, and I wanted to really give the Planning Commission an idea of what the broad implications of the zoning change would be, and namely what the benefits to the township would be if the zoning were approved and if this land development plan that's being bandied about actually did move forward. As I mentioned, a year ago we started talking about the 17 intersections. Traffic counts have been done. Pedestrian counts have been done. A lot of analysis has been going back and forth with Amy Kaminsky of Gilmore, Steve Norsini, Kevin Kachansky, and everyone. And at this point, although we don't have a published traffic study, I've done enough investigations that I know what the trip generation impacts of the site are and what the mitigation measures would be, which aren't even really fully necessary to offset the impact of the development. But one of the things that's a benefit of this whole process is that we get to work through and have a cooperative medium to improve not only Villanova but the township as a whole. So last week, in fact, a letter was submitted to each of you along with several attachments, two of which were attachments B and C, which my office prepared. And the slideshow I'm about to go through is a redacted version of that. It's basically just the figures. The study area is very large, and I broke it out into essentially 3 different areas where there will be changes that will be significant from a traffic perspective. This first slide shows that there are several driveways that are west of Church Walk being on the right side of the slide and Route 320 on the left side. You'll see there are several intersections for properties that are owned and controlled by Villanova on the south side of Lancaster Avenue, and the red arrows indicate 6 driveways which will change in the future. This next figure, figure 2, gives a very broad and rough idea of how, again, the zoning could lead to a land development plan which involves a consolidated single surface parking lot to replace all the individual surface parking lots that are currently used by those individual driveways. And the removal of all those driveways that we previously looked at, you can see that they're actually gone now and replaced by grass areas.
Are you proposing a light?
No.
There.
This proposed access, as the yellow arrow shows, would take the place of those 6 accesses, which today are currently unrestricted. They're unsignalized. They have lefts in, lefts out, rights in, rights out. This access would be an RIRO driveway, which is right in, right out only driveway. And that alone is a traffic benefit because it reduces potential conflicts with through movements and makes traffic flow better, not only the traffic on the driveway, but the traffic on the main road as well. Now, you may ask, well, how are the people that are making the lefts in and lefts out today going to do that in the future? And one of the benefits of this potential plan is that the surface parking lot not only accesses Lancaster Avenue via this driveway just discussed, but also accesses the driveway going out to Church Walk to the right via another internal roadway, which is signalized and where lefts in and lefts out can occur. This is exactly the sort of tenet that you hear out of PennDOT for access management, driveway consolidation, and it alone is an improvement that is worth considering. This is a blow-up of Church Walk, how it looks today, signalized intersection with crosswalks, 2 through lanes in each direction from which certain turning movements are made. So in the eastbound direction where the arrow is pointing right now, there's a single through lane on the left and then a shared through right lane on the right. Likewise, in the westbound direction, there's 2 through lanes, a shared left through, and then an exclusive through. In the future, we propose changing this to include the pedestrian bridge, which means that the crosswalks could potentially be eliminated as shown in this photograph. The bridge itself is not shown. You can picture it being above the camera in this view. And we're adding 2 new turning lanes, an eastbound right turn lane, shown on the left side, and a westbound left turn lane, shown on the right side. These movements, again, benefit through traffic because they remove traffic that is currently turning today out of those lanes that are shared with through traffic, which means that there's less likelihood for queues and potential blockage of through traffic on both those approaches.
Can I ask you something on
Yes.
that last slide you had up there?
Sure.
Now, I'm not sure if this is what I should be asking at this point, since we're not really looking at the land development, but they seem to be intermixed quite a bit. You have the 2 through lanes going into the turn lane of the other one. That won't work.
This is the existing condition, and
Yeah.
this is the projected condition,
Okay,
which
see
is a
the arrow
widening.
on that side, see no arrows on that side. That center lane would go directly into your turn lane. So
Yeah, this
you would
is-
have to widen it.
Absolutely. Yeah, this
Okay.
again is just meant to give a concept of how things would look, but it's not an engineered plan. There would be the necessary widening to have the proper alignment.
So you
with
would have
through
to
traffic.
cut back into the property there to make that turn lane.
Possibly. Yes.
Would you know which side of the road you'd be widening on, or both?
Again, I mean, this is getting.
You haven't gotten that far.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, fortunately, we control land on both sides, so we would do whatever we need to make it work effectively.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Where would the you said you showed you say the bridge? Would the bridge be over the pedestrian walk or where?
You can see the part of Church Walk at the very top of the slide. It's essentially currently proposed or contemplated to be right at that point. So it would fly over what's the existing northbound approach right now, 1 lane north, 1 lane inbound south, would possibly be bifurcated, which means it would be spread apart with a median in the center that's meant to support or help support the structure, where it would continue down to the Route 100 pedestrian crossover that currently exists, which is a very convenient alignment, which was, again, one of the reasons why this was looked at initially.
All right.
I have a question. The new surface parking lot, I see that the rear of it obviously gets you to Church Lane. Does that continue in some way all the way to Ithan?
It does, and we will get to that in the later slide.
Okay.
This last slide for this Area 1, as I believe I've been calling it, is a summary of the previous slides. On the right are the new right and left turn lanes at Church that we were talking about. One thing I didn't mention in a previous slide is that we would also be adding a right turn decel lane at the new right in, right out driveway, again, to get people out of that through lane, especially since it's not exactly close, but it's closer to Route 320 than Church Walk is. So as traffic leaves that 3-legged or 6-legged intersection and is possibly accelerating to continue, the last thing you want is people to slow down immediately to turn in. So there's the potential for adding a right turn lane there as well. The next area is the main intersection, Lancaster Avenue and Ithan, or Route 30 and Ithan. This is the existing condition today. Ithan is top to bottom, Lancaster Avenue is left to right. I'll point out that shown in the lower right corner, there's an existing curb cut and unsignalized driveway for what we call the Pike Lot, the 577 space parking lot in the southeast quadrant of the intersection. That driveway is only used occasionally, and it's outbound only. In the future, and again, this is just a broad depiction of these buildings, a couple things are going to change. First is I'd like to see us take advantage of that driveway to get traffic that's coming from the east, heading west, and going toward campus, the ability to turn into the back, if you will, of the parking structure before it even is processed by the intersection of Lancaster and Ithan. And there's a couple benefits to this. First is, as traffic is heading west from the east and comes up to Ithan, to get to the Pike Lot today, you have to stop at the traffic signal, wait for a gap, turn left, head south on Ithan, wait for another gap, turn left again to get into the Pike Lot. Lefts are the most difficult turning movements at any intersection, whether it's unsignalized or signalized. Here we have both. We have the signalized intersection at Ithan and 30, and then again, the unsignalized access off of Ithan. By allowing traffic the ability or possibility of pulling in early, we remove traffic. We not only shorten the travel time of that motorist, but we actually remove traffic from the signalized intersection of Ithan and 30 and also along Ithan itself. Now, in order to safely accommodate that, we need to provide some facility for that motorist, basically a left turn lane. So again, if you look at the previous shot, what was photoshopped in is a conceptual rendering of how much longer that westbound left turn lane would get, which not only adds more capacity to the signalized left turn lane, but also adds a whole new facility for the unsignalized access. So this is a multiple benefit. It removes traffic from the signalized intersection. It gives more capacity to that westbound left turn lane, so it's less likely that the queue from that left turn lane would spill back into the through lane and hold people up there, which does sometimes occur.
Excuse me, are you worried about the fact that if the first car wants to turn into that parking lot early, what it does to everybody behind them who might not anticipate that turn, that thinks they're going to the stoplight, but how they get around somebody that might actually be turning left when they didn't realize it, and then they pull back into traffic?
That's a very good question, and obviously there is always that possibility. But that exact situation exists at Villanova Center today. If you're heading east on Route 30 as you come up to Route 320, there is a left turn facility that's shared by multiple access points, including Villanova Center, which has signalized access now, as well as the Route 320 intersection. So if you're leaving the Blue Route and you're heading eastbound, it's possible that a leading eastbound motorist with the left turn indication on could pull into that lane with the intention of going up to 320, whereas a second motorist behind them could be going into Villanova Center or vice versa. It's always the responsibility of the motorist to be alert and not rear-end someone or drive into somebody. And the good thing about this distance between these 2 points, you can see it's almost a quadrupling of potentially the left turn stacking, is that more than likely there will be a gap between the point of entry for this unsignalized access and the tail of the queue for Route 30 to Ithan southbound.
Can you create a gap just by moving, like the prior slide, just by allowing, in other words, 2 left turn lanes? Like put another one back?
You could, but this is a nuance that we can get to in land development, obviously, but there's different ways to skin the cat, so to speak.
It would strike me that people trying to turn left there, especially if when the light of the intersection is green on Lancaster Avenue, that's going to potentially create trouble turning left, going into this. No?
No, again, what typically happens today is this short left turn lane does accommodate the queue of people who are turning southbound on Route 30. So imagine for a moment that's where the tail of the queue is for the traffic that's looking to head south on 30. If in the future it's now this much more storage, and the beginning of the queue where the red double-headed arrow is all the way back there for people going into the garage, someone who's behind that motorist who wants to go south on Ithan will see the tail of the queue is further up. It's beyond the motorist turning into the right double-headed arrow, and will just continue in the middle lane, in the through lane, and pull up behind the other motorist.
I'm thinking more of the person turning left into the parking structure, but
I'm sorry, I didn't follow the concern then.
You're right. Well, they're turning across 2 lanes of traffic if.
Yes, that's a good point. And one of the benefits of this location is that At the signalized intersection, not that far to the west, not only are there different phases that stop traffic just for traffic's sake on Route 30, but there is the all-red ped scramble phase, which will still exist in the future, albeit somewhat reduced. But when that happens, all traffic is stopped, and that creates gaps or opportunities in the eastbound flow of traffic to allow the westbound left-turning motorist at the proposed access the ability to make that movement, which is odd and typically doesn't occur at most signalized adjacent intersections. Again, this is a minutia of detail that we can continue to work through in land development, but this is initially
But it's fascinating. We want to talk about everything.
Yes, fascinating.
But do you anticipate having to widen this portion of the highway?
No. Yes and no. We won't be widening for the through lanes, but we'll probably have to widen to accommodate the substantial increase in the left turn lane stacking. So again, this being a photoshopped document, you really can't appreciate what's happening on the right side, but obviously to accommodate a tripling or quadrupling of an existing left turn lane, you have to move the curbs back slightly at the tail end to widen the road to accommodate that. If there were shoulders today, then maybe you could eat into the shoulders, but basically you have 12-foot travel lanes that go right up against curb, so in order to do this, there would be some physical widening. Now, that's just one side. That's the westbound side. You'll notice that on the eastbound side, there's an existing left turn lane as well, which is even shorter. And one of the things that have been negotiated to this point is instead of having the 6-story or whatever it was parking structure, we're now a much lower parking structure, and we've added parking to the north to HSB and SAC parking garages. We're basically up here. So since we'll be adding new traffic or redistributing existing traffic to those facilities vis-a-vis those new parking spaces, we will be adding to the westbound right turn, and we will be adding to the eastbound left turn. So one of the things that will probably happen is the queue will get longer, and we will need to extend that left turn lane accordingly. We probably won't need to double it as currently depicted, but we will need to widen it and make it longer, and that's one of the things that will also be included. So
Can I ask a quick question? You mentioned that the pedestrian crossing time will decrease?
Yes, we'll get to that soon.
Okay, you're going to talk about that.
Yes. The last area of traffic improvements before we get to pedestrians are the existing access points and the proposed changes to the access points on Ithan south of Route 30. Today, these are the points of access. There are 4 driveways. They are all one way. It's very hard to make out, but in the center, there's essentially a 4-legged intersection. Those are the 2 inbound driveways, so the traffic goes away from Ithan going into the main lot, away from Ithan going into Pike Lot, and it's the other driveways that are the outbound-only driveways. In the future, one of the driveway will be eliminated, and all the driveways will shift slightly to the south, as depicted here. In addition, the allowed turning movements will change also. At the driveway that's closest to Route 30, the northern driveway, which is a secondary or really tertiary access into the parking garage, since there's the other access to Lancaster Avenue not shown, it's my opinion at present that that should be a right-in, right-out only driveway. The reason for that is if you're heading south on Ithan and you want to enter the garage and try and make a left, sometimes the queue of stop traffic heading north on Ithan as it approaches 30 is waiting for a green ball indication and does back up to or beyond this driveway. So any entering left-turning motorist would have to wait for a courtesy gap in that queued traffic in order to enter. That motorist may stop and wait, which means that other traffic behind it won't continue to flow or get by, could back up to Lancaster, which is an unsafe situation. Likewise, any left turn out could potentially be stymied by the northbound queue that starts at Route 30. So there's really no reason, especially since this is a 3rd driveway, to have this be anything other than right in, right out. The other driveway will be the main access and would be opposite a driveway behind the residence halls that connects out to Church Walk and connects out to that parking lot and that signalized access. It's currently my thought that one of the ways to also reduce the burden at Lancaster and Ithan is to provide post-mounted signing for eastbound traffic on Route 30 that says alternative access to the parking garage, turn right at Church Walk, and then follow around behind the residence halls to come out here. That would allow traffic to avoid entirely the intersection of Lancaster and Ithan, which also increases the overall performance by reducing some traffic there. Not everybody would necessarily do that, but the few people that did, or the some people that did, would potentially be a shorter trip and reduce traffic. The other big change here is I'm proposing, at least currently, that this intersection be an all-way stop-controlled intersection. This would allow the left turns in and out of both driveways to more readily and safely make those maneuvers as traffic, just stops and curtsies to one another to allow other movements to occur. This happens throughout Center City, Philadelphia, for example, and works very efficiently where you have a lot of conflicting movements, left turns through traffic. And it won't significantly add any delay to Ithan Avenue because, for one thing, northbound motorists don't have very far to go before they hit Lancaster Avenue anyway, where they potentially will have to stop. So just adding a short delay for people to stop and yield to one another doesn't have much difference in that direction. Likewise, in the southbound direction, it's a very minimal added delay.
How would you keep people from coming down from Lancaster Avenue, making a left turn? Yeah, how would you stop that? A barrier or what?
No, potentially during certain events when police do control the driveways today and may in the future, there's always the possibility that that additional left turn capacity will be needed at that driveway. So
I'm talking about when somebody just wants to make...
So having a physical barrier would make that not possible in the future.
Okay,
so it would be a post-mounted restriction. There would be a sign that would be on a post, possibly an 18 by 18, 24, 24, some kind of sign that says no left turn. It gets supplemented with pavement markings for added reinforcement, but it would be no different than any other restriction at no left turns at driveways that you find today.
It's the honor system. I mean, people have got to honor the sign, or they could ignore the sign and make a left
everything
and back
that
up traffic going back up to Lancaster Avenue.
Correct. Everything that we're assuming today, we do assume that there's compliance by motorists with the laws of the road. There's always the possibility of channelizing that driveway, actually putting in a pork chop or channelization island to make it more challenging. That eats up more space. And again, this is only the most broad concept that we're trying to convey here. It's not a final design that would come later in land development if the PCC is clear to recommend the zoning.
Excuse me, I can definitely appreciate the fact that you're trying to reduce the volume at the intersection. But my concern is that it doesn't decrease the volume on Ithan. And that's where a lot of these homes are affected right now, because if everybody from Church Lot doesn't have to go through Lancaster, they can just cut right back to Ithan. Ithan's still going to see the volume. So how do we get the people off of Ithan? Like, how do we encourage them to stay on Lancaster on the arterial roads and get them off of Ithan? Because now you've got stop signs in addition to what I have to go through every day.
Sure, that's a good question. I have a couple answers to that. One way to encourage people not to cut through neighborhoods and to use primary arterials is to make those arterials flow better and make them more attractive to motorists in the first place. If there was less delay on Route 30 or 320 or any highway in the Commonwealth, people would not be incentivized to cut through neighborhoods and go down lower speed limit streets and possibly deal with tighter turning radii. They would just stay on the major roadways. One of the things you heard me mention earlier is all these additional turning lanes that we'll be adding, which will allow traffic to flow better as through traffic on Route 30, because we'll be reducing conflict or deflecting the conflict. So I believe traffic conditions will actually get better on Route 30, marginally, but they will get better.
But you did just comment that you were going to encourage people to access the stadium, the lots, by going around the backside of the residence halls.
And that doesn't affect traffic flow on Ithan. I'm talking about traffic coming from the west, heading east on Route 30, would make a right at Church Walk, hook around behind the buildings.
Right, but it increases Ithan's issue.
It doesn't increase traffic on Ithan. It's going behind the residence halls, coming out this driveway and going straight into the garage.
But
She's thinking about the section of Ithan.
More times that people have to stop.
Yeah, once you get past the P&W bridge, it's not going to have any effect. There's going to be the high traffic that you have, right? That's what your point is.
The average delay for an all-way stop control intersection is typically between 9 and 11 seconds per vehicle on approach. It doesn't really matter that much as long as there's less than 500 vehicles per hour on all 4 approaches. The added delay to those motorists on Ithan or on the 2 driveways would be very minimal.
But we already have a problem.
We're not adding traffic, though.
But we already have a problem, so we got to get rid of our problem in this whole
And I was going to get to that next. The problems that exist today have nothing to do with this proposed zoning. If there's a concern that the township has with existing traffic, then we could work responsibly as partners with the township to try to address different things that could be done. But what we're here talking about tonight, this is our 3rd meeting about zoning, is the potential changes to things like setbacks for parcels that are affected by Villanova on both sides of Villanova. So although there's going to be a change in traffic, Nothing we're talking about tonight, nor we have been talking about, is going to be adding traffic to the area. It, in fact, is going to be reducing traffic. So one of the things that you could do to help people on Ithan and anywhere would be to recommend the zoning, because all these people that are commuting today, these 1,159 students, wouldn't be commuting in the future.
Well, I don't know. I read the thing from Delaware County that's sitting here, and they actually disagreed with that proposal. What is it?
I don't think they did, but maybe you could enlighten me. We did receive comments from PennDOT this past month, and they actually agreed with the trip generation that we were proposing.
Not the one
How about I
Frank?
continue with
Yeah,
this, and we
continue.
can.
Let me see. I'll find it and pull it out.
Before we leave this four stop sign intersection, have you also considered the possibility, and I don't know if there's enough distance from Lancaster, of making that a signalized intersection, and further to manage traffic on that, using cameras that face towards the front of the car? That way you can actually change the time at certain times of day when there's a greater need to get out or get in.
We have not specifically considered that at this point. That's not to say that it's not possible or will be ruled out by the applicant. I do know that any signal in the Commonwealth has to be approved by PennDOT, and there are very stringent standards as to minimum volumes, and they're specifically most often minimal side street volumes, not main street volumes, that trigger the need for a signal.
Is
So we
Ithan
would-
a state road?
I'm sorry?
Is Ithan Avenue a state
It's
road?
not, but it doesn't matter. Any traffic signal in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has to be approved, reviewed, and upheld by PennDOT. Even signals found at the King of Prussia Mall, which are completely internal to its rights-of-way, have to be approved by PennDOT.
And off the cuff, is that enough distance to possibly have a signalized intersection?
My concerns, at least initially, would be the distance secondarily, but the volumes primarily. You really do need to have a certain amount of traffic in order to warrant a traffic signal. And the investigations I've done to date really indicate acceptable performance at this intersection with an all-way stop or not. I think it would be better for everybody if there was a little bit more control and slightly added delay by having the all-way stop. But this is, again, a minutia of detail that would come in later in land development if we get to that point, and could easily change.
I think that when we asked to see the traffic things, one of the things we wanted to see is what you're showing us here, which is the design of the traffic flow that can improve the conditions. And I think you've showed a lot of options. And I know it's not finalized, and these are concepts. But you've also assured us that traffic will actually be improved. The volume of traffic will actually be improved. But I'm not seeing any numbers. Where are the numbers?
Well, part of the reason,
That's the concern as we consider adopting a new zoning. One of the main concerns from the residents is all through this area are that the problems they have now are going to be exacerbated. Now, you've assured us, everyone, that no, it's not going to be exacerbated. It's going to be handled better, and it's going to be less. But we need to see those numbers.
one of the things that's not in the presentation but was included in the 35 copies delivered to the Township last week, possibly in front of you right now, is a review letter from PennDOT. And that review letter concerns two deliverables that were sent to both the Township and the state. The first deliverable were just existing conditions, all the many volumes and pedestrian counts and whatnot.
It's at the back of this larger.
The 11 by 17 attachment B, about halfway through, yes. Or at the end, possibly.
It's at the end.
Thank you, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
In deliverable 2, which is still currently being reviewed by the Township, the whole notion of trip generation, how traffic is going to change, was discussed and presented. And one of the things that was presented was, again, how peak hour traffic will actually reduce in the area. But to be conservative, we were asked by PennDOT in the letter they sent us on March 4, 2013, not to do that. I think it was comment 5D, and instead to keep traffic during the peak hours moving, which it won't be, and also to add additional trip generation due to the 113 spaces that we're proposing, which really have more to do with the Performing Arts Center than actual need, but to add additional traffic because of those additional spaces, and base that on existing trip generation at the site today. And that's an important concept, because what that basically boils down to, and the numbers aren't in there, but what it basically does boil down to, it's in a deliverable, but it's not in the letter, is less than 100 additional peak hour trips. That's AM and PM. I think it's like 40 in the morning, 50 or 60 in the afternoon, which, again, from my perspective, is extremely conservative, because I think logically that it's going to be negative traffic, but not only we're not making it negative, we're adding traffic. Even with that added traffic, the intersection of Route 30 and Ithan today processes about 2,500 vehicles per hour. So if you add another 100 vehicles going through that intersection, it's a difference of about 1.5% to 2% added traffic, even under the most conservative possible way of looking at this. So all these improvements that we're talking about, none of them are necessary to mitigate or offset the impact. And the reason why I didn't come forward with those specific numbers today is because 17 intersections, 2 peak hours, parking, pedestrians, I would be here all night. But I can tell you that so far we're working very much in the spirit of cooperation with Gilmore and with the Township. And although we still haven't gotten all the answers on both sides yet, which is to some extent hamstringing me from really completely moving forward, I think we all know what's going to happen, especially on the strength of the PennDOT reviews. So it's not going to be that much added peak hour traffic. These improvements will more than offset the impact and will actually improve the situation overall, the reduction of the driveways, the consolidation of access. But again, I think we all understand a little bit about what happens if the zoning gets enacted, and that's really why we're here, is to see if there's a recommendation to allow us to get to land development, to continue to fine-tune this and see what other improvements, if any, could be offered. Now,
I think I agree that there is a lot of detail, and we can reserve some of that for later. However, I do still feel that if you look at comment C under number 5, it says that additionally it is considered unreasonable to assume a decrease in traffic to from an area where parking will be increased.
That was
And I think
that
that's
was
what
the
you
one
were
I was
talking
referring to.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I thought. And so I think you're saying that traffic will decrease, and you have your reasons for that.
yep.
We have our concerns that even though students may not be commuting to school anymore, they may be driving to the grocery store, sports, jobs, et cetera, and this could impact traffic. Am I correct? Is that what we're...
Well, yes, and I don't think the amount of dorms that you are proposing takes care of all the students that live off campus, correct?
I don't know.
No, so in other words, maybe people from Conshohocken move closer, but I would see surrounding counties having a less number of, or fewer number of Villanova students, but I could still see Garrett Hill, which is Ithan Avenue and Meadowood and Conestoga, get the heavy traffic from there, still seeing the volume. So that's our big concern as residents.
I understand, and I actually did want to talk about 5C in a minute, but just to follow up on that topic, even if most of the 1,159 now commuting students just simply shift from more distant areas to more local areas and still affect traffic that's locally because of that change that you just described. It's still going to be some non-zero number. There's still going to be some reduction in commuting traffic. Maybe it's 159 and 1,159, but it's still going to be some reduction. So there's still going to be some benefit to this. It's still going to be some non-positive number. I can tell you that it's very rare that any planning commission will hear an application. I know in 20 years I've never had the opportunity to make this argument that traffic will get reduced. I know, for example, there's an application that's currently being discussed by the township of a large office building on King of Prussia Road that has an order of magnitude more traffic than we're talking about. Not double, not triple, but an order of magnitude more traffic. So something like that is maybe something that you could focus on off-site improvements and other concerns. But this, what we're talking about right now, no matter if it's 100 or 500, is still going to be less traffic. But getting back to 5C, I actually misspoke earlier. It wasn't 5D that I was referencing. It was, in fact, 5C. And if you turn the page past the PennDOT letter, and you see that there's a Yahoo small business email going to PennDOT, because that was a very, in my opinion, clumsily worded comment by PennDOT, under deliverable 2, you'll see that it says, the department accepts the contents of the deliverable subject to technical comments, blah, blah. Specifically, as outlined in 5C, the department requests that all parking spaces, both existing and proposed, be treated as moving traffic. While this contradicts the intent of the project, I indicated that I believe we could agree to this approach and that future submittals will reflect a requested change. That's exactly what I was talking about earlier, how we're actually treating all of it as moving traffic still, and that we're adding some additional traffic due to the 113 spaces. And just because that wording was somewhat potentially subjective, I sent Mr. Haney this email the very same day asking for clarification, and his response directly above says this is an accurate summary. So far, we are still in agreement.
Your design is based on parking spaces and nothing more. Your traffic design is based on the change in the number of parking spaces.
Which is something that we've been talking with Township staff and PennDOT about for a year now, because there's
And you've
really no
actually
way
shown in those numbers
in those deliverables.
that the traffic is reduced in the peaks.
Yes. Essentially, when you're building an office park or a residential community, you are bringing new traffic to an area. You do base your trip generation on a variable like number of units or thousands of square feet. In this case, we're not adding students. You've heard us discuss many times how the enrollment's not going to change. We're bringing the people that are currently commuting on campus. So we really can't use students as a variable. We really can't use square feet as a variable. We had to think of some other variable that made sense to relate potential traffic increase with this potential plan that may rise from the potential zoning change. So for want of a better variable, parking spaces themselves generate traffic. They don't generate one trip for every parking space in every peak hour, as is sometimes considered. They actually generate something less than that, but parking does generate traffic. So everything that we've been basing our work on today, deliverable 1, deliverable 2, reflects that. And that was what PennDOT was commenting on, and that's what we're working with the township on right now.
So if additional spaces do generate traffic, you're saying there's going to be a reduction?
I'm saying that the concept of this project is to reduce traffic, but to give the township something much more than a modicum of conservativeness, in fact, a lot of conservativeness, we did base adding traffic on, in my opinion, the unrealistic notion of added traffic due to the added 113 parking spaces.
Madam Chairman, if I may add to the conversation, and with all due respect to Mr. Tavani, this was brought up well over a year ago, but the township and our consultant at this point has not concurred with the fact that there will be less traffic, and I just want the Planning Commission to know that. And that's why we're still going through this review process at this point.
Sure, sure. Why don't we let Frank finish with his other attachment, because that's very interesting also, the pedestrian stuff, and let him get through it and hold our questions. What?
I do have something specific to.
Go ahead. Mike.
Okay. The new proposed parking lot that it's been referred to earlier here as the commuter lot behind the homes and the offices that are along Lancaster Avenue now.
Yes.
The surface parking lot?
Yes.
Okay. You have that right back up against the property, which currently, the back of the property, which is currently all trees. I
Yes.
drove back there this morning to see what Aldwin Lane looked like and how close that was. You take all those trees down, they've totally lost their buffer. And according to the ordinance that you've proposed, that would not be required to be buffered there because it's not against a residential property. But visually, it is against a residential property. The tracks are not that wide. I think that's a problem, having it that close to there and removing those trees and not putting a buffer in.
Yeah, Kathy, just one thing. This is not part of the district, so a buffering requirement is still applicable here. Where the new surface parking is, it's not part of the CICD.
Okay.
So
I don't
those
want
same
that to slide
regulations.
through saying, well, this part doesn't allow it there. I wanted to voice my objection to
Sure.
it right now.
And there is an intent to buffer that there, too.
Okay, with a
Yeah.
good buffer.
Right.
Not like a few crummy little
No,
stick trees.
no, there is an intent to buffer that all along.
Okay. The other thing is, if you're basically creating a road along the railroad tracks there. And I'm concerned with the noise and everything, especially with the trees missing, that we're creating for the neighbors on Aldwin Lane. I just wanted to bring that up, since we seem to be commingling the...
Well, it's hard to talk about one without the other,
Yeah.
and that's understandable.
And the lack of a buffer along there is a problem, I think. And part of that would be in the CICD district.
Well, I'd like to thank you first for bringing up the first comment, which wasn't traffic related, so I appreciate the break. Those are not
let's wait.
But your second point about noise due to traffic, there would actually be less noise from the perspective of Ithan, because today there's 1,126 active parking spaces in the main lot, and there's about 90 parking spaces in those smaller individual lots along Ithan Avenue. So although there's going to be a parking lot of about 300 or so spaces closer to the tracks, there's only going to be that, plus the 147 spaces behind the residence halls, plus the 80 spaces for the visitor lot, all of which add up to less than half of the parking spaces and the parking and traffic activity currently found in that quadrant today.
But those parking spaces don't drive along the back of the property. They get out from the back of the property and go to where the entrances are. You're creating a road to go along that property line.
The southwest quadrant of the intersection where the main lot is a sea of impervious, 100% impervious, very
I don't
large.
care whether it's impervious or not. You're putting a road
What I'm
there
s-
and you're sending traffic down it. I know it's impervious.
What I was going to say is those cars travel through that entire quadrant.
But they
going
don't
to
go
those
speeding
1,100
down the
spaces.
road. You go slower in a parking lot than you do on a road to get out.
Okay. I understand.
Why don't we let Frank go through attachment C? We can't just talk about this one issue all night. Go ahead.
Isn't
been a
one of
half
your
hour, Mark.
strategies to reduce trip generation to have the parking garage primarily for dorm students?
Yes,
I don't think that's been made clear so far today.
that's a very good segue into
And
the
the
pedestrian.
commuters are then, does that mean more commuters will be on the new floors on the other two garages on the other side of Lancaster?
No,
No.
but we will get to that as well.
I just want to respond that the top floors of the new parking structure are envisioned to be storage for the students who live there. And the West Lancaster surface lot we talked about was envisioned to be commuters, and the lower levels of the new garage intended to be visitors. So there is combination in the parking structure.
Now, the commuters are going to be on this. What the parking, the additional floors on the parking garages that are existing back by the railroad tracks, what are they going to be for primarily?
Cars, the people. Yeah. Faculty and staff, okay. Just one comment too, because we start talking about the West Lancaster lot. Part of our direction from staff and neighbors was to alleviate traffic on Ithan Avenue, and that is why we've dispersed it. I think the cover letter indicates there's so many surface parking spaces now along Ithan Avenue, and that is being dispersed now to the West Lancaster lot as well as lots on campus that actually have less parking spaces that would access Ithan Avenue. And that was a direct referral from the township to alleviate traffic on Ithan.
One of the questions that was brought up since the last time we were here was pedestrian activity and how much is there, how's it going to change in the future. We actually did document pedestrian activity as part of the traffic count endeavor. At every intersection where we had individuals, people conducting counts of traffic, we were also counting pedestrians crossing every approach to every one of the 17 intersections. So to get started with this, just in way of going back a little bit, you've heard that students tend to walk to where the classrooms are, and they tend to take the shortest path, as every mode of traffic does, whether it's a car or a person. People always take the shortest path available. The blue buildings shown in this figure represent the large majority of classroom space, which represent all the classroom space on campus, the large majority of which is actually located west of Church Walk. If you draw a line from the bottom to the top of this figure, kind of going through where Church Walk is shown in red, to the left of that is where most of the classrooms are. So it would stand to reason that if people are parked in the main lot that are commuting today, or parked in Pike Lot, they would probably take the shortest path to get to these buildings. So, similarly, for South Campus, where the students can walk along Aldwin and go over Route 100 and take the Church Walk, it's the same thing. So the question becomes, with that understanding, did the counts actually reflect that? Of course, main lot, as we just discussed, is a very large area. It's not just a focal generator of pedestrians that go to classroom space. It's a large area. So within that main lot itself, there's a little nexus of activity. You would think, simply stated, that the left side of the main lot, which is shown in that amorphous red blob there, anyone going to the buildings to the left would take the shortest path, which would involve walking to the west, walking to the left, and crossing at Church Walk. Likewise, anyone parked on the right side of the main lot, which is the green blob there, would possibly cross at Ithan, namely at the crosswalk that is on the western or eastbound approach, the western leg, going from south to north. But even of those people, some of the people who are on the western half might still find it to be a much shorter path, depending on where they're going, to cross at Church Walk, which means that something more than half of the activity of those spaces would cross at Church Walk. Finally, for Pike, it's clear that since the intersection of Ithan and Lancaster affords that rare all-red PED scramble phase where all traffic stops and PEDs can cross any way they want, including diagonally, that anyone parked and commuting from the 577 spaces at Pike would cross on a diagonal from the southeast to the northwest. Finally, at South Campus, at South Campus, anyone who's leaving South Campus and going to the main campus could either walk to the north. Since there's no sidewalk on the west side of Ithan Avenue, they would most likely walk along the east side, come up to the diagonal just mentioned, and cross in that fashion, or go straight across Aldwin, taking the shortest path to Church Walk to get to the space. So having said all that, now the question is, with that logic assumed, do the counts actually reflect that? And figure 5 are the pedestrian counts that we collected. You really can't make them out on the slide, but since you have the benefit of the figures in front of you, all the movements I just described are highlighted in yellow. So taking, for example, the movement from Pike Lot, the southeast to northwest, that is the diagonal shown here, which I believe is 291. So that's how many pedestrians, 291 pedestrians, crossed in that 1 hour period from that corner lot where the 577 spaces are to the northwest. At South Campus, you can't really cross diagonally there. You cross on one of the 4 approaches. As predicted, it's the approach crossing that southbound leg or the north leg, 201. And at Church Walk, it's the crossing on the right, which is far greater than the crossing on the left, 390. That's all, again, during the AM. The numbers during the PM follow a similar pattern, but in some cases are significantly more, as shown. And I won't go through them all just to keep things moving along.
Well, did you notice that when looking at the AM peak hour, that if you add up the totals, the numbers are still higher at the Pike Lot than they are at the Church Walk?
And I did. And we are going to be getting to the calculation of how PEDs were derived for future volumes. That includes an amalgamation of the 577 active parking spaces today. And as Mr. Kunda indicated, in the future, with the 1,230 space parking structure, most of which will be warehoused vehicles owned by people who are going to be living in the LAH and therefore won't be active during peak hours and therefore won't be generating people coming out of the cars and walking to the classes. They'll be actually walking out of the buildings going to the classes. It's going to have a definite change on the synergy of that crossing. Plus the people who are leaving, some of the people who are leaving South Campus, again, some are going to the north and crossing, and some are going to the west and crossing. So that's a contributor to that number as well. But we'll get to that in a little bit more detail in these last few slides, and then I'll be finished. So figure 6 just focuses on the key movements. We just took out the background noise of the other volumes and just focused on the key movements. If you go back to figure 5, the 189 spaces, the 390 crossings on the right side of Church Walk during the AM peak hour, that's a component of activity of people from Main Lot as well as people coming from South Campus. And essentially, if you break that out, the 201 coming from South Campus and continuing up to Church Walk and subtract that from the total 390, you get the remainder that's due to Main Lot. And then you can compare the number that's shown in pink, that 189, with the other number shown in pink, which is the other side of Main Lot. And you can see that's actually not 50-50. It's relatively close, but there is more of a favoritism on the left side of Main Lot to go to the classroom spaces. Again, as previously guessed with the red and green blobs, it's just a shorter path. Same thing happens during the PM. So now what we next did was try to relate that activity to the number of active parking spaces. So there's 1,126 parking spaces in Main Lot. If you just, to be conservative, cut that in half and have 563 on the left side, 563 on the right side, you can relate that to the PED activity shown in the pink boxes and then actually get a ratio of PED activity during peak hours per parking space, which is the number that's a decimal shown in green above the pink boxes, 0.34 and 0.19 during the AM, 0.58 and 0.54 during the PM. And then you can also do some work with the South Campus numbers and look at the numbers that are shown in those green boxes to try and come up with how that all feeds into the northwest crossings. And what it all boils down to is figure 8, which shows how the volumes would change in the future with the 246 spaces that are due to commuter activity in the West Lancaster lot. There's 337 spaces projected there. Some of them are going to be replacing the parking that's going to be lost or removed for those individual buildings. The remainder, our thought is to have the remaining commuting students park there because it's actually closer to the classroom. So it'll be a shorter walk for them, and it will direct them to the pedestrian bridge rather than make them walk out of their way and go all the way to Ithan and cross there. Likewise, there will still be the visitor lot, which is an 80-space lot. That's a constant under existing or proposed conditions. The South Campus people will continue to do what they're doing today, which is crossing at Church Walk to some extent. In fact, that may even go up, but we left it the way it was to be conservative. All of the active parking spaces are going to be removed from the main lot and replaced with only a handful of spaces that might be used for visitors or deliveries or things of that ilk that could contribute to parking demand. However, there are going to be people living in the residence halls, and they're going to generate parking now as well. So a number was estimated for them, all of which is identified in the footnotes on the right side of this figure, and all of which adds up to the number that's in red, which is about 450 crossings during the AM peak and about 434 crossings during the PM peak. Those numbers are more than, although not tremendously more than, but they are more than the activity that would take place at Ithan, which itself would be about 20 to 25% less pedestrian activity in the morning and more like 50% less in the afternoon and during off-peak hours. So there would still be a ped scramble phase there. It probably wouldn't be 26 seconds. It would probably be closer to maybe 18 to 20, something of that ilk, because there's going to be a substantial reduction in activity. But you still need to have some activity there because there will still be some crossings, whether it's South Campus, which doesn't have anything to do with this zoning, but is still there, or the spaces in the parking structure itself. You can see in Figure 8, the numbers shown in orange, 300 spaces. That's the number of spaces out of the 1,230 that would potentially be actively used by staff, visitors, or perhaps any other individual who may be walking from the south side of Lancaster to the north side to the main campus. The remaining spaces would be occupied either by students who are currently parking in the main lot today who live on main campus. They would now get displaced to the parking structure. And of course, they don't generate pedestrian activity because they're living on main campus. Their cars are just warehoused there. And people living in LAH and having their cars more or less warehoused during peak hours in the parking structure, and some dedication to public safety for its needs would be there. So it's probably going to be even less than 300 spaces that would be active, but to give as much conservative measure as possible, that number was kept pretty high. And by the way, the number of cars that we estimate in the garage to be owned by the LAH residents, we kind of had an incubator study of sorts at West Campus where we have a similar number of students who are a similar demographic makeup, undergraduate, juniors, and seniors, and we can track how many cars they own to predict what the ownership of car activity will be at LAH or the residence halls, and therefore the number of cars lost or the number of active parking spaces lost to warehoused cars in the parking structure, all of which went into these calculations. And that's that.
Thank you.
Can you say all that again? I missed it.
Yeah. No.
No, it's nice to finally have some numbers so we can think this through. I'd like to get Amy up here to help us. Obviously, this is the first time we're seeing both the conceptual design for improvements of traffic flow as well as these pedestrian numbers. And I wanted to ask you where you are with, I know you've been working with Villanova and getting some of these traffic studies information going back and forth between the two of you, and I know it's not finished yet, but where are you?
Right. We've actually had 2 deliverables. Is this the first presentation?
I'm sorry.
Yeah. If we could. I'm going to mess up the PowerPoint for you.
That's okay.
I mean, as you can tell, we're
I'll put it back to
fascinated
the
by all
end
the
of that.
numbers and all the design, but we're not the traffic experts.
Well, and one of the things that I do want to remind you is that what we're here now, right now, is rewriting the zoning and looking at that information. And the information that Frank's bringing here is to assist you in making those determinations. The traffic study is still not completed. I know that there are some concerns possibly about this always stop here. We don't have the analysis with the volumes that are going to be going through that intersection right now. So I don't want you to get stuck on the information that you don't have and thinking that it's not going to allow you to make the decision, because even though the zoning may be, if, for instance, the zoning was approved, the zoning change, we're still going to be vetting out a lot of information after that. We would be looking at the warrant analysis for this 4-way intersection, looking at the cues that are happening here, checking to make sure that the left turn lanes aren't going to create any kind of locking for the roadway. I know you're concerned about Ithan. One of the things that I think is that they're doing right at this intersection is reducing the number of curb cuts along this area. Because if you travel through here, you have lefts and rights all over the place. So you have a lot of bottleneck occurring in such a short area, whereas if we can concentrate those movements and allow them to move in an orderly fashion, I think that you're going to get better movement on Ithan Avenue. So those are some things that I did want to reiterate what Frank was saying here. And the other thing, I'm not quite completed with the second submittal that came in from Frank, but one of the things that we are looking at is that the analysis is based on the additional 113 parking spaces and what that might mean to the nearby intersections. So there is additional traffic that's being put in here, even though the argument has been made that there is no additional traffic in the area. We had requested, and there is going to be at least the 113 spaces, and we're still discussing how to handle the bistro and the convenience store, because I'm not 100% convinced that there won't be some kind of attraction from outside sources. You know, with having your bookstore on campus, as you pointed out the last time, it's less visible. Now that you have it on Lancaster Avenue, it's a little more likely that you're going to have those pass-by trips coming in. However, they're going to be probably coming in during the off-peak hours. They're not going to be coming during the peak hour when you have students coming and going, you know, to and from campus. So, you know, there's a lot of things that intuitively you understand, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be during the peak hour. And I did hear some concerns about the special event traffic, and that has not been, that is something that we are still talking about, and we want to make sure that there's a good plan for coming to campus and leaving campus when they have special events. So although the volumes are less than during a typical peak hour for the school day, they are concentrated in these particular areas, and there's less volumes on the roadway, but we still need to make sure that we have an efficient way to get people onto campus and off campus so that it doesn't mess with people that are on Ithan trying to get to and from their houses and have to pay attention to Villanova's schedule to make sure that they're going to be able to get in and out.
And what's your initial impression? Obviously, it's an ongoing study. You don't have all the information yet, but what you have so far. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the event days at Villanova are troublesome to the neighbors. We understand there are going to be events, and that's understandable, and that the plan is to manage them as well as possible. But adding a performing arts center on top of that at this corner, what is your impression of that impact?
Well, that was one of the items that was discussed in Deliverable 2, and one thing, and I would tend to agree with this, is that when campus is having a special event at the Performing Arts Center, you don't typically have it occurring during the PM peak hour, because it's usually an event that occurs at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. Mm-hmm. And you don't typically schedule that at the same time that you have a basketball game, because you don't want to have those competing things going on at the same time. And Villanova has that capability of making sure that they don't have those conflicts for scheduling. And presently, they do the performing arts right on campus. It's central to one of the buildings. I can't remember, the Vassy building maybe? And even though it's probably half the size of what they're doing for the performing arts, meaning 192 seats versus 400, I don't know the exact numbers. But those things are occurring, and they are scheduled outside of other special events to keep parking spaces available for patrons that are coming in for the performing arts. So I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah.
Madam Chairwoman, if I may, just for a moment, from the perspective over here, sorry.
Hi. So you throw us off when you sit on that side.
I know. Just as part of what Amy has here, a large percentage of the input is going to come from the police department on this particular issue, because they have been there with a lot of events. They know traffic flow. They know all the problems with traffic. So as part of an administrative recommendation, they'll be working close with Amy, but the police are going to weigh in very heavily on this, of how it works now and the changes that have to be made, because they've seen it. Because, again, nothing against the traffic engineers at all. But the reality is you can see things on traffic engineer, but when you actually have the experience of officers for years and years and years of the problems of the traffic there, we're going to rely very heavily on their input for this particular one, too, working along with
That's-
Amy on this.
Thank you for bringing that up. That was a very good point. And I am in constant communication with the police department, and I appreciate you reminding me about that, because they are driving the roads all the time. They know what's going on in the area, and when they're sitting there directing traffic, boy, wouldn't it be great if we did this instead. So they're able to share that information with me, and they will be part of the process determining what would be the best way to handle special events. And they've been involved since the beginning about different strategies for the intersection improvements and things like that. So I have to admit, the first two deliverables that I received are more about existing conditions, trip generation, which really doesn't serve the answer that you were looking for. What kind of delays are we talking about? What kind of improvements? But Villanova has gone ahead and jumped beyond that point and said, these are the things that we know we're going to need to have to do. And so I was really pleased to see the right in, right out. I don't often see people coming in and offering that immediately. Extending left turn lanes, putting in deceleration lanes. And although we've had quite a few discussions with them about it, you're never quite sure if the applicant's hearing you, and it sounds like they are hearing that there are going to be improvements that are going to be necessary for this.
At what point in the work that you're doing, along with Villanova, would you be able to make a recommendation to our board about the general impact on traffic that this zoning ordinance would possibly create? Not the plan, but the ordinance. Because see, we all have opinions about the traffic, but we're not traffic engineers, and we'd like to see the numbers because we want to get our minds wrapped around it and understand what's going on. I think Frank did a great job of explaining not only the design improvements that are possible, but as well the pedestrian numbers, because with the possibility of a bridge, that's something we all want to talk about. But when we're looking at adopting or recommending a zoning ordinance, we want to know, is it going to create a situation where it ends up being very difficult for the police in the future to, manage all this new traffic, or is there really no new traffic? When will we be at a point where we know that?
Well, I guess what I could say from all the information that I've received and the information where we're having these discussions about the improvements that they're open to, and I hesitate to give you a final answer on things.
Sure.
But I am seeing a lot of cooperative effort. I think that they're hearing what we're saying about this, and typically these improvements aren't vetted out until you have that land development project coming in, and it's very I don't want to tie us in to improvements when we're not quite at that point, meaning we're not at the land development stage. But I also understand your concern about allowing a zoning improvement to occur, a zoning change to occur without knowing what it is what it means to your roadways and how this is going to affect what's occurring in your area. If you're looking for a 100% assurance from me, then it's going to have to wait until everything's been submitted.
No, we just want your opinion to this point.
I think I haven't really looked at the zoning changes specifically to see how they, what opinions I would give on that. But as far as what it would mean to your traffic, I think that we're moving in the right direction, and I think that there are some very good improvements here that would really help out the area significantly. And that
Can
would
you
be
comment at this stage on the pedestrian bridge and the pedestrian movements that we were just talking about with Frank?
Yes.
What is your feeling there?
I agree with what he's saying about the distribution. I hope you could follow what he was saying. I've had
Every
the benefit.
word.
Well, I was
He's a brilliant spokesman, and I feel I have a tremendous understanding of pedestrian movements now.
We could go on for hours about that. But, I actually have taken several hours to sit and analyze what his discussions are and what his arguments are and what he's anticipating to happen. And I tend to agree that if you make that path of least resistance to get across over there, that this is what will happen. And I agree with that. I wish we could push more pedestrians over there, but what he's telling you is accurate. He has not hocus pocus these numbers. They actually are based on separating the parking lot out, determining what percent are going here, what percent are going here, and how that's going to be in the future. So
And
I would agree with that.
There's been some talk that there should be 2 bridges. Personally, I feel they'd be too close together, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think in my opinion, it would be a mistake to put a bridge at Ithan. I think that you have some elevation differences. Unless you can make that movement up to the bridge and across the road convenient and easy for any pedestrians, they're not going to use it. Students are going to take the easiest path to get across the street, and they're going to cross at the signal on the street. PennDOT's not going to allow you to eliminate that signal at that intersection because you do have public pedestrians. They're not all Villanova pedestrians that are coming through this area, so they're not trying to get over to Villanova. So I don't think that that's the best location for it. I think where they have it for Church Walk is the best location.
Can you remind me of what the students that are going to be crossing at Church Walk, where is the actual, besides crossing from Aldwyn area across the connector there, where is the actual entrance to the elevated crosswalk from the parking facility? In other words, where do the students who decide to cross there have to go to get over the street?
I don't know if we have and I really can't point that well.
I mean, is it a path of least resistance, or do they have to back up to where it is now?
I would have to go, oh, here we go. This will do it. All right. So if we're talking about doing the walk down here, can you see the cursor right now? Yeah. Can you see where the cursor is in the lower right-hand corner right now? To the left.
There we go.
No comment. Down in that area, there's actually a pedestrian crossing over the SEPTA line right there.
Right, I used
So
that
the
before.
students come out of South Campus, they walk through a path through, I believe it's Aldwyn Park.
Yeah.
And then they come to this location, and then they would ramp over, because we need to make sure that it's ADA.
So in other words, everybody has to come to the back portion of the parking lot to access this overpass?
No.
So that's where would
no.
they come, if they're not coming from South Campus, but they're coming from the parking lot where the commuters just pulled in, where do they get up on top?
No.
Again, it's not fully designed, but we would have a combination of ramps and bridges, ramps and stairs right about here. So where the corner of the dorm is closest to the, right.
Up in this area, between Residence Hall, where it says Residence Hall. Can you
Right.
see that? Okay, up in that area.
Does that answer the question?
Questions
Does
for
that help?
Amy?
So is it right now you're feeling that the increase in traffic assumed based on the increase in parking spaces could be mitigated through these measures?
As of right now, yes. That's not to say that these are the only improvements that are going to be needed, but considering that they don't have that end information, it's very difficult to see what other improvements could be made. There's going to be retiming on Lancaster Avenue, I would assume. There may be other things along that line, traffic-related, that may end up vetting out that we may need to do, but we don't know it yet. So these are the improvements that I'm seeing without anybody saying you should be doing these improvements, or the analysis shows that you need this left turn lane here and this right turn deceleration lane here. These are the improvements that they've offered, not knowing that end result, and I think it's because you were looking for some information to help you in some kind of a decision.
And I touched on this earlier, and we made eye contact, and I want to give you an opportunity to speak to it. The Ithan cross four-way stop sign intersection, do you have a preliminary opinion as to whether or not that should be a lighted intersection versus the four-way stop signs?
That's a good question. And I really like always stops, because I think when you don't have those cross volumes occurring out of the parking lot during non-school days, I think it allows for more efficient movement. Anticipating that you're going to have a little bit of a delay at a stop sign is preferable to having a traffic signal that you always seem to get stuck at. The distance from the one signal back to that intersection, the one at Ithan and Lancaster, I think it's probably too close to be an efficient traffic signal. I don't know if you noticed, but I was looking at my cell phone to try and see what kind of distance, or if the driveway was moved back further, what it might, help out at. So I am hopelessly cautious, or cautiously hopeful, that the always stop would handle the traffic. But like I said, we don't have the numbers. And I'm asking again, not to get hung up on that, because it's just something that we will keep an eye on, and we have a list of things that we need to keep apprised of.
So we can be rest assured that as you develop the plan, or the plan develops itself, that there is attention to the volume of traffic on Ithan and the way that, because, path of least resistance for me going from the surface parking lot coming back to Garrett Hill, I don't really have a desire to go out onto Lancaster and come around if there is a route back to Ithan. So my volume of traffic could potentially switch to that stop right there. And so my biggest concern is what could potentially happen there. Even though the numbered spaces indicate church, the actual path of least resistance indicates Ithan. So I just, as a resident, want to make sure that, believe me, I think the changes that are proposed today, what has been proposed, are some really great ideas. The turn lanes, I think that's great. I just want to make sure that we address an existing problem and hope that, as the plan develops, that we can feel comfortable if, when this does get passed on, that this is not going to be a dropped issue.
Okay. If I can just reiterate what it is I think I heard. So you're concerned that non-Villanova traffic might use Church Walk to come over to Ithan and to avoid?
No, I'm just concerned that surface parking lot people who are commuters who are leaving and coming, going, that they might not choose to come out to Lancaster Avenue to exit.
Okay.
They might choose to come back to Ithan
Okay.
because it's the path of least resistance to where a lot of the commuters live, which is Garrett Hill.
Okay, and Garrett Hill would be to the right.
So Garrett Hills goes south on Ithan
It's
and then
outside
goes...
the picture on the right. Yeah.
Correct, and then
Okay.
it goes either down to Meadowood, which is the cut-through, or
Well-
down to Conestoga,
All right,
if they haven't learned the cut-through yet.
Following your analogy and your discussion, if I am coming out of these surface parking lots and my intent is to get on Lancaster Avenue eventually and continue down to Garrett Hill, is that?
No.
No, taking another road over?
Right, you wouldn't have to go
Ithan
on
is the
Lancaster.
shortest route.
Conestoga.
Yeah,
Back to-
Ithan's
Ithan's the shortest route
We
to
just want to
Garrett
make
Hill.
sure
Okay.
that we don't find that all the people in surface parking lot chose to use the stop sign area.
Yes, we will be looking at the volumes and analyzing them. As far as the traffic volumes, I would imagine that any of the volumes that are coming down Ithan and heading into Garrett Hill are going to be about the same as what they are right now. If that's, if the origin's here and the destination is there, then either
Right.
they're going to go up to Lancaster and make a right on Ithan, or they're going to make that right on Ithan. And by allowing these other entrances and exits, if we can reduce the traffic at Ithan and Lancaster, we can get the traffic to move through on Lancaster.
I think what we're trying to accomplish, if I understand the concerns of additional residents in that area, not just myself, because I live right back there as well, is just making sure that we already have a problem. How do we can your traffic study incorporate some of our concerns to better suit the problem? I'm not saying
Yes.
it doesn't right now,
Yes.
because there's a lot of information here, and I think some of the things you've done have been great. We just don't want to pass it on, or I don't want to pass it on.
Okay.
With the same type of situations we have at Meadowood in the morning, and
Okay.
it's dangerous. I mean, I sat there one morning and I counted the number of cars that blew through the stop sign at more than just a rolling stop, and I only had one person stop the
Okay.
whole time, and my child's getting on the bus there in the morning, and it's really nerve-wracking.
Well, bringing up Aldwin Lane, that was something that was brought to the township's, list of things that we needed to discuss with Villanova. And so there will be some discussions about what to do about that. What are some, we're going to provide them 2 or 3 different ideas of what we think we could do to see how it works out. And I think if, you have a particular concern, if you can clearly identify what it is and let the township know, then that's something that we would definitely take into consideration and try and resolve. And that may not even have to wait until this Villanova project. I don't mean to speak for the township, but...
No, that's fine. And again, I think that, again, don't hear me or get me wrong, I really do think the concept is a great idea. I'm for some changes to that parking area, for the stormwater management, capturing them, for all that. I just want to make sure that it's done so that we don't feel like we just moved into the city. Yeah.
Right. And I do want to let you know that we do have a list of things that we're keeping our eye on, and that definitely could be one of the things that we could add to it to see if there are some improvements that we can make happen. So.
Maybe if I could just add to Amy's aspect on behalf of the township, the administration, there are numerous issues still that we have to hammer out with Villanova in this plan. We've already cost them millions of dollars already on this project. And I'm sure there's more coming based on this, but a lot of that is handled through land development as well. But just know that, again, too, that also being a resident of Garrett Hill, and I know the folks that are here, they'll take my Flyers flag down. I'll be replacing it if things aren't corrected in that area. But I just know from, again, being in the area, driving the area every day, seeing the traffic from what some people say to what's truth and reality are a lot of different things. We have actually engaged Amy and her firm to do some additional study work on behalf of the township so that we have actual data that we can use, and not that we don't trust Villanova's, but also I feel a lot more comfortable having our own data and our own study done too to compare with that. But there are a multitude of issues yet that still have to be worked out. Traffic is a big issue that I don't think anybody's satisfied with, or even into the neighborhood traffic patterns as well. Again, the police department, we're going to be looking at them very strong on this. From Steve Norsini's perspective too, as well as infrastructure improvements as well, stormwater management, the capacity for sanitary, all of this, there is a lot of information too, design developments too as well. This is all going to be handled within that land development, buffering, screening, all of these issues where, I don't want to say you're going to have another bite of the apple, but you got a big piece that's coming back at you again before this ever moves. And I think what's been good is the commissioners have stood behind us in a lot of these issues here. They have brought a lot of concerns. I think without that bridge being there, it was made clear to Villanova, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the project wasn't even moving unless there was a bridge in the project. So it was done. And they came forward with this. There's traffic issues. There's how the traffic is going to flow in the neighborhood, what the impact of the neighborhood surrounding the area, screening, noise issues, a lot of infrastructure issues. Those are all, there's a lot of issues yet to be worked on. So maybe just to give some assurance to you, this project's got a long way to go yet, as well as we start seeing the development side of this. And Amy's been fantastic throughout the whole process here. I think she has been a real pit bull on behalf of the township too, for looking for the information and sticking in. And I think that's one of the things too that, you know, we listen to the residents. There's a lot of very good concerns that they've brought up. Again, not living there day to day and seeing how traffic moves. They've been very valuable for the input. So I think there's still a process to go. Right. And I think land development is going to be a big area where there's going to be a lot of issues going to have to be addressed.
Amy, I was a little surprised that you, because in preliminary notes from the township, there was a discussion of 2 bridges. And I'm surprised a little that you think that there is no merit to the second bridge.
I'm not saying no merit, but what I would be concerned about is constructing the bridge and not having it utilized. And because of the elevation differences at Ithan, I think it would be really hard to make that an option that would work with pedestrians.
You know, I have a comment for you to consider, and I'm not asking for your definitive answer tonight. Church Walk, one side of the pedestrian bridge is at grade, the other side you have to get up. If the Performing Arts Center and the garage traded places on Pike, and there was an elevator or something in the garage, would that make it much more logical and feasible to have a second pedestrian crossing at Ithan?
I think it would actually move more pedestrians over to Church Walk and would make it make one crossing more viable. If you're
move the garage
to
where the PAC is, right? Not over to Church Walk.
To Church Walk, or
No. Move the garage to Lancaster and Ithan and the corner, and flip-flop the location.
Okay, and then have
the Performing Arts Center more interior on Ithan.
I think the idea is that if there were buildings connected by the bridge, rather than pedestrians off the ground, but pedestrians coming straight from parking into either the athletic complex or another building.
It could, yes. If you moved that parking structure to a situation up on the corner, it's going to be ugly, but you know it would serve the purpose of having a direct access from there to cross the roadway right there.
Just hypothetically, one side would be not grade, but it would be easier to access.
It would be a similar situation to what you have at Church Walk, but just the reverse, because you have that elevation difference up at Church Walk, and then you have those grades that work out. Yes.
Amy, over here. Ithan is basically one lane in each direction. Have you considered suggesting that it be widened down to the South Campus dorms so that you could have a center turn lane for either direction?
My understanding is that, no, that hasn't been vetted out, and we haven't even gotten to that situation of analyzing all the roadways. But one of the things that we did discuss was there's a driveway just north of Lancaster on Ithan. I can't remember the name of the building. But I believe it's over, it's not up there. I don't even know if it's in there. Is there anything in here with the visual?
North?
When you go
You're talking
across,
north, Ithan?
when you cross over Lancaster as you're heading north, it's going to be immediately on your left, and that creates some conflicts with the Qs and left turns. And my understanding is that they have already, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've already made some improvements to that and prohibited the left? They put a gate there. So
they're putting a gate?
They already put a gate up so that you can't get into that entrance. It's maybe 100 feet from the intersection. You have left turns come the other way, left turns facing off, and you're pinching off traffic.
My concern's south, because one of the...
south on the other side of the... You have
because we were talking about the buildings having maybe a 5-foot setback, which would allow no extra room for widening the road.
Well, and one of
and
the
that's
things
part
that
of the
hasn't-
zoning that we need to think about now.
Right. And one of the things that really hasn't been discussed is on Lancaster Avenue, even though they're intending to have that 5-foot setback from the right-of-way, it's unclear what right-of-way PennDOT is going to want. So, and that's kind of the things that I'm talking about, that making sure that those things will be handled during land development. And it's
But
not
the problem
necessarily-
is we're approving zoning now. So if our side yards and front yards and rear yards are too small, there's not, and the buildings are built, then how are we going to fix these things later? You can't. We need to have wider setbacks now so that it could accommodate
And
the
maybe
possibility.
then maybe
of
that would
widening
be
the road.
one of your recommendations to the board, is that you would want a greater setback off Ithan. And I think those are the types of things that, moving forward, you need to keep track of and make sure it gets...
Yeah, we need to just talk just about
Yes.
the setbacks, because a lot of the other issues that we had related to that. But
Right.
we'll get to that.
So I think that might be a recommendation that would come from the Planning Commission.
One other thing on the pedestrian traffic, sorry.
That's okay.
You primarily considered the trips created by going to classes. And we all know students in college campuses go to a lot more places than classes, like the Connolly Center, student activities. And those facilities are more on the other side of the campus. All the athletic complexes to the east of Ithan Avenue. Yeah, the Connolly Center pretty much in the center, but more to the right side. And I blew up a map here, if you want to put this down on the table there, and highlighted with a yellow marker some of the places that students would tend to congregate around Connolly Center and so forth. And that's more to the right side. So I'm not arguing, and it might not even be the place here since it's not really considered in the zoning, I don't think. But is it up there? You can sort of see the yellow.
Okay, so, now wait, you kind of said quite a few things here, so.
Yeah, Connolly Center's in the,
Yeah, I'll point to Connolly Center right here on my picture's plan.
right.
So what we're talking about is there's going to be some housing over here.
Yeah.
The crossing will be at this location, and then you have the signalized intersection here. And your concern is?
My concern is when we were talking about pedestrian crossing, we were only talking about students going to class. And students will go to the athletic facilities, Connolly Center, the libraries, and so forth. And a lot of them tend to be on the other side of the campus. So I'm not sure that...
It's like a pull in that
Yeah,
direction.
I think we need to maybe still consider that down the road, and it's not part
I
of
was
the
just gonna
zoning
say that.
issue right now. But I just wanted to bring that to the board's attention since, we've only heard about the classroom trips, not about the other trips. And commuter students tend to hang out at Connolly Center.
Well, they would come on campus and then they would remain on campus between classes. So if they're parking in the student parking that's going to be
way down there,
this
yep.
area, it's more likely they're still going to cross over for the pedestrian. And then
Okay.
my guess is that they would hang out on campus for
Yeah,
the day.
I didn't really want to
to
bring this up for further discussion
Okay.
right now, just as a point
Just
of
something
interest.
to remember and
Yeah.
keep in mind.
Anything else
Thank
for
you.
Amy?
Excuse me, Madam Chairman. I'd like to address the question about the setbacks. Is those setbacks will be measured from the right-of-way of the improvements that would be required during the land development process. So it wouldn't be 5 feet from where that curb or right-of-way line is today. If the road would needed to be widened during that land development review, or any other engineering aspects, whether it be stormwater, sanitary, that would require a widening, then those setbacks would go from there. It wouldn't go from where it currently is today.
But I think Kathy's concern is the building will be built 3 years from now. We say, oh my God, this is a mess, but the building's already built.
So she's concerned that the right-of-way wouldn't be identified now, and then we would have the setback based on the right-of-way that we thought we might need,
Yeah.
and then where would we be?
Not so much that, but particularly on Ithan, where it's
I-
a narrow road to begin with, we
Sure.
might need that third lane or lanes on either side for turning in. And it's so narrow now, if we go to a narrow setback, there is just no room to adjust it.
But the point I'm making is during the land development process, it very well may be determined that roadway needs to be widened in order to conform with your current land development ordinances that are on the
But if
books
it
right
doesn't,
now.
we're stuck with what's there.
No, but Kathy, the right-of-way, the ultimate right-of-way that's going to be required under Saldo is going to be 60 or 80 feet.
Okay.
And that's what is measured, the setback is measured from. The setbacks have nothing to do with future constructions within the roadway. That's what the right-of-way is for. That's why under the Saldo, it's required to be 60 or 80 feet.
So
on
you're
these-
saying that Ithan would have a 60 or 80-foot right-of-way?
Unless they get a waiver to it, that's a Saldo requirement right now.
Okay.
That's correct. So the building wouldn't be 5 feet from the curb. It would be from the right-of-way.
All right. Do you guys want to talk about the setbacks now, or do you want to continue with Villanova's presentation?
I just have a question. So based on the plan itself,
Okay.
I understand what we're talking about with traffic. However, with the ordinance, basically the only thing in the ordinance to do with traffic is that we're increasing density, therefore increasing traffic. But the ordinance does not require any of these things we're discussing as far as traffic mitigation. Am I correct?
Well, that would be during the land development stage that we would make those requirements.
So those
and
fall back on the
changes.
current standards that we have?
Correct.
So that will not be modified in any way, shape, or form?
My understanding is no.
No,
Am I getting that right?
Those traffic improvements are once again Saldo, and that's not being changed by this proposal.
So the only thing we need to be comfortable with is that the increase in traffic can be handled with our current Saldo. That's what we need as far as traffic
The improvements that
goes.
they're offering, and the fact that we do have another opportunity during land development to vet out and make sure that they are taking care of any of the problems that are out there.
So I guess I'm trying to make the jump from the plan to the ordinance. I just don't want to be making recommendations based on the plan. I want to make recommendations based on the ordinance.
Right.
So is
Correct.
everyone in agreement on that? That that's basically what the ordinance allows for, an increase in density?
And the ordinance is what has been submitted. The plan really has not been submitted as a plan. It's to help us understand the ordinance. And we had so many questions about traffic that we've gone through some of the details because that's a major issue in looking at this whole site. But the only thing we're making a recommendation on at the end of this process is the ordinance itself.
So I guess my personal feeling is that I would be much more comfortable with the ordinance if there were some kind of offset to the increase in density for traffic impacts and any other impacts to the area. So as it stands right now, we are modifying this area to increase density in that location. However, we're not offsetting that or compensating for that within the ordinance.
Within the zoning ordinance.
Right.
That would be true statement. But there's nothing in the zoning ordinance that requires them to make these improvements.
Just to add something real quick, sorry, Amy. Remember, this is a conditional use requirement that.
So you're saying it's going to go through the process and negotiate. So at that time, things could be negotiated such as open space.
Correct.
So one thing we want to be sure of as a board is there's a tendency to think that if we recommend approval of this zoning ordinance and if it were adopted, that, if it says there's a 10-foot setback, there's going to be a building right there and then we'll never be able to fix a problem, whatever. But because it's a conditional use ordinance, the township has more input, I believe. Is that correct, Peter?
Yes.
Somewhat, but we still it's still the ordinance controls. And push comes to shove, the conditions we attach need to have a foundation in either the language of this particular ordinance or elsewhere, other provisions within the zoning ordinance. If we wanted to impose, let's say, a second bridge on them as a condition, most likely we wouldn't be able to enforce that condition if they said, no, we're not going to do it, because there's nowhere in our zoning ordinance that says they would need to build that second bridge.
So my thought, looking at the ordinance language itself, has kind of been look at it not just in terms of the plan we've seen, which I mostly like, but in terms of worst case scenario.
Right, and there's a lot of stuff in the ordinance that, you guys have spent 95% of your time reviewing the plan, which really doesn't focus on what the ordinance is saying. And yeah, the plan reflects what's in the ordinance, but there's other things in the ordinance that are not reflected on the plan.
Right. And I think now
there's other aspects where they take advantage of certain conditions of the ordinance in certain areas of the plan, but not others, but they could take advantage in other areas. So, I think one of the things the staff has kind of said that you need to avoid the land development, the plan, and look more at the ordinance, because there are things in the ordinance that are not being contemplated in the plan that if you guys just focus entirely on the plan, you're going to miss.
Right.
And so you need to kind of look at the ordinance language and think, oh, okay, they're saying, they can have a 5-foot setback if it's an arterial road and we own both sides. Well, that applies both to Lancaster and to Ithan, and maybe it applies elsewhere in the campus. You got to start expanding, when you look at the ordinance itself, expand beyond this particular site.
Right. I think that we now have, because we've been through this for a while now, I think most of us could agree that we have a firm grasp of what the plan is now. At first, it was very confusing to look at the ordinance and the plan, but now we've talked about the plan quite a bit. Some people might like parts of it, some people might not, but we get it, like what the plan is and where everything would be. And now we've got this other piece about how things would work in terms of the traffic and the pedestrian crossings, which is very helpful. So we need to turn to the ordinance itself. I don't know if you guys are ready to go through it, paragraph by paragraph and start to, wrap our minds around that. I know everyone's read it. But if you're ready to discuss that directly, we can do that. I know as part of that, one of the main things we're going to want to discuss are the setbacks, building heights, those kind of things that are what's covered in a zoning ordinance. Before we go on, I know that when Villanova started their presentation tonight, they had several topics to cover. What was left that we did not cover yet? Thank you, Amy.
I just wanted to grab that for you.
She's still here, by the way. She's right over there if you have any more questions.
I will be very brief. Thank you for your patience with the presentation on traffic and pedestrian counts. We were asked at the last...
Hang on, we don't want you to start your presentation again. I want to know what the topics are left that you had on your list.
Just two, impervious coverage.
We need to get comments and...
Sure, impervious coverage and the current planned, what we could do under the current planned institutional, And then Nick was going to highlight the changes we made to the amendment from last time to this time.
Okay, can you cover impervious coverage very quickly, and then we'll go into those things that are more about the ordinance? That'd be great. And then we're going to try to go to public comment earlier rather than later, because, all right, thank you.
We were asked to explain the impervious coverage a little better, so we took a shot at it here. Today, we have 494,000 and change square feet of impervious. If this is passed and approved and our development is passed and approved, we will reduce the impervious coverage by 41,494 square feet. So that's the net change, including the proposed surface parking on west of Church Walk, which isn't technically part of the CICD. We also will install, we'll have fully managed stormwater management system, which today does not exist. So today there was nothing, and we put in a full stormwater management system. We briefed that previously. We were asked what we could do under current ordinance. We could build some dorms in the anvil shape, and we could put some parking in the dark shape to the right, and it would yield the following. So 324 beds compared to the 1159 that our CICD would allow, and it gives the square feet, parking, et cetera, no performing arts center, and slightly less total impervious coverage if we were to go that way, which of course we don't think is a good idea. And then Nick was just going to highlight the changes to the amendment.
I had a question on this about the hardscape number.
Sure.
The current zoning allows for 11,000 and the proposed for 97.
No, please don't interpret that as
But isn't
the current
the parking
zoning
lot?
allows.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
what
if we
could
were-
happen under the current
Exactly.
zoning? Isn't that correct?
Yes, but we were
Okay.
trying to squeeze in as many beds as we could on the
Sure.
allowable space, and that's what it yields. It's not, we're not trying to max out
I understand.
anything.
Yeah, it doesn't take into consideration nonconformities, which I think.
That's my question. If you, all right.
Any other questions on those two?
So wait, the comparison on hardscape, the 11,000, that's what's permitted, it's not what's existing?
No, that's what, so we were asked, what could we do within the existing ordinance? And we could fit about 324 beds is the most we could fit. Then that drives parking, and then that drives the impervious and the hardscape. So it's not the maximum impervious or hardscape.
So that's just the relative, based on the 324, those numbers would follow?
Exactly.
Okay, got
And
it.
it doesn't count any of the nonconformities that we currently have a totally paved area. So this would be if we had the, clean slate.
Right, we cut it back.
Exactly.
We would have the setbacks, et cetera.
Some comments on the ordinance, and actually Peter raised some of them, and actually this was a concern last time too, that there were some holes in the ordinance that perhaps it wouldn't achieve the desired effect because it had not really matched the plan that we were presenting, and there were some holes such as setbacks and things of that nature, which I've now corrected in the ordinance. In particular, I want to bring out a couple points to you. Because there was concern that if you pass this, Villanova could do it throughout their whole campus, or other institutions could do it throughout their whole campus. The ordinance has now been modified to say that the CICD must be on an arterial. So that would be either Spring Mill or Lancaster Avenue. But furthermore, it says it only can be on one side of the street. It can't be on both sides of the street. And further, that an institution may only designate one area. So if Villanova decides this is the area it's going to be designated, this is the only area that it can occur. So we've clarified that in the ordinance because I know that was a concern last time. They could do it throughout campus. So we've now modified that you only can designate one area of the CICD where it would be applicable.
But that does mean, though, does it not, that because of the way the thing reads, you could do, so that the lots don't have to be contiguous. They could be on the north and the south side of Lancaster Avenue, for example, or they could be on both sides of Ithan Avenue. Is that
They
correct?
said one side of the street. It would have to be on one side of the arterial. So you couldn't mix. You couldn't do it on the north side and south side of Lancaster Avenue, or on the east side or west side of Spring Mill. It would have to be on one side of the street. That was a change that was made. It says, if you notice the underlined portion under subsection C, 68.1 subsection C, you should have, I hope you have a track change. Okay. That shows that, one, the arterial was an underlined portion. Two, that it has to be on one side of the arterial. It can't be on both sides. And also that you may only designate one area. I know last time, too, there was concern about the parking structure and surface parking. That's also been modified. Again, as I mentioned to you last time, it was kind of an error on my part by not catching it the first time around. But the parking structure must be a minimum of 120 feet from Lancaster Avenue, and any surface parking has to be 60 feet from any street area, whether it's Ithan or Lancaster Avenue. Additionally, there was some comment about loading, and we have provided a provision for off-street loading as well, because remember the board brought out before there was no provisions for off-street loading. So we did put in provisions for off-street loading that's very similar to the current code as it stands. A lot of the other changes, if you want to go through, we can go through them, but they really had to do with tightening up the ordinance, as you see on this chart here, so that, for example, you notice the parking garage on Lancaster Avenue. The old provision that was written in February had 5 feet. We've now revised that to have 125 feet instead of 5 feet. You'll notice on the surface parking that's been changed from 0 feet to 60 feet, which is actually what the current institutional ordinance provides. If you go down that chart there, that kind of shows you where we've made the changes in order to have it more consistent with what the intent was of the ordinance itself.
Any questions for Nick?
Yes, I have a question. In the PI meeting that we had the Thursday of last month, one of the things that was brought up, and maybe we'll be getting into this, but that in favor of allowing for additional stories to be created, we put the green area around the perimeter instead of in between the buildings, and considered allowing the buildings to be closer together so that we didn't have them pushed up against the street. Mm-hmm. Has there been any, and I've read this a bit, but has there been any more talk of applying that to how we look at the layout of Villanova?
As far as providing more green along the street?
In other words, keeping the setbacks, not making the change so large here, being able to maybe keep our setbacks a little bit greater and in exchange for allowing the height of the building to go over. In other words,
I do not have this in the ordinance. If the board wants to recommend that, certainly, I think that's why we're here, is to take
right, just to kind of see what we might need to do, because
what the Planning Commission would recommend in their recommendations to the Board of Commissioners.
Why does the wording street line instead of right away? Is that what we're talking about, right away?
It's the same.
Okay, they're interchangeable.
I think in the zoning code, and it could be wrong, that sometimes refers to street line, but it's the same thing.
Same thing.
Street
Okay,
line and right-of-way.
fine.
I think there may be a definition in the current zoning code that says a right-of-way is the street line, and I'd probably just use that language.
45% overall impervious at the end of the day, that's what we have now.
Yeah, that's what we have now.
So we're keeping that consistent.
Yeah, we're keeping that consistent. And I added that in there because I don't want to have there was any misperception that we were decreasing impervious as a result of this development. Throughout campus, it would be the same impervious requirement, which is 45%.
But this particular lot is way over 45% now.
Correct.
And we're only reducing the way over by 10% in this current design.
We're reducing it, and you still would have to, as I said, comply. This lot would still be part of the entire campus as far as when you're looking at 45%.
You know, some of the setbacks are so small. What's the rationale for the 5-foot setback from Ithan?
Well, again, a lot of that had to do with the fact that you own both sides of the street, and we're not really referring to that large of an area that's impacted. You're talking about an area that's maybe 100 feet or 200 feet long that is impacted there on Ithan. We're not proposing it anywhere south of the bridge. It's all north of the bridge is being proposed, between north of the bridge and Lancaster Avenue, not even the other side. So we're asking for relief to limit it there just because it's a limited area when we're talking about the setback.
So when we see a setback that's that small, that Skip pointed out, and I understand the setbacks are from the right-of-way line, not the curb line.
Correct.
So a 5-foot setback at that point, how far is that from the curb?
Well, it depends, again, if the right-of-way, it depends on what the right-of-way is. I think the plan
When you said it was a short area, does it have one right-of-way?
Yeah, I think right now it's, and remember, the area that we're talking about is really the parking structure, is the area that we're talking about with that reduced setback of 5 feet. And there's a bump out here, and that's the area that's only 9 feet from the right-of-way, that is. And I believe there may be another, at least currently.
You're talking about the plan now? I want to talk about the ordinance.
Right.
If you have a 5-foot setback, how far would that be from the curb?
It depends on what the right-of-way is. Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to find out.
That's why it's.
Madam Chairman?
Go ahead.
But what is the right-of-way there?
Madam Chairman? I believe that's a 60-foot right-of-way there existing.
And that road's about 22 feet, isn't it?
To answer your question, it would depend on where the curb would end up, again, depending on what recommendations are made for any roadway improvements or any other improvements that front that. So that on a 5-foot right-of-way in this scenario, the simplest way I could answer it, if the right-of-way stays at 60 feet, it would be 35 feet from the center line of the roadway.
Okay.
Where that curb line ends up depends on what improvements are required.
Right. So my concern is that with some of these very small setbacks, that could be almost nothing, depending on how the road ends up being designed and built in that area.
Although remember, too, you could have a right-of-way that is 20 feet in from the curb, and you're measuring it from that 20 foot, not from the curb, when you're talking about the setback.
So I think when you're talking about big setbacks of 120 feet, it's not so important because you might be going 10 feet this way or that way. But if you're talking about a 5-foot setback, that issue becomes very important because if you have a 5-foot setback and you're going 10 feet one way or the other, that's a huge difference. So, I mean, as we talk about the setbacks, we have to be aware of where those building
Well,
lines are going to be.
on the drawing I'm looking at, it's 11 feet appears to be the
I
closest
think
point
that's
to
from
the
Lancaster.
ultimate right-of-way.
Yeah, that's from Lancaster Avenue, yes.
And 15 feet on, well, no, there's a setback line. I don't know what that means
Yeah,
exactly,
that's for
structure
the-
setback
yeah,
line.
For the Performing Arts Center.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. But that's apparently, from what I'm gathering, that's a moving target, apparently. But you're right, I think 5 feet raises an alarm bell, because you can picture yourself driving down Lancaster Avenue, and here's this huge this structure.
And if it were
that's
5
right
feet
5
off the
feet off the
curb,
road.
that's,
Well, this is only if we moved the parking structure to the corner as one of the earlier scenarios that were,
Remember, that 5 foot really
It's
deals
only
with
for
the parking
parking.
structure, right.
and if you're going to put a parking structure, it's a lot different than putting a building.
5 feet.
It's not going to be 5 feet from your face. It's going to be 5 feet from the right-of-way, which is going to be probably an additional 20 feet. So you're talking about 25 feet from where you're driving.
Right now, it would be 19 plus 5.
Approximately, based on what we have now. Unless this became a 4-lane road, and in which case it would probably be an 80-foot right-of-way. Am I not?
Yes,
wouldn't it be?
That
that's
would
right.
be reasonable, yes.
So
That's
then you
correct.
still have another 10 feet in there on each side.
And where do we
So-
put the sidewalks?
Well, I'm just saying, worst-case scenario,
Well, I think
we have 4
need
lanes.
to consider that, though.
Then it's going to be 15 feet from the curb at least. Am I
And
right?
that's what we need to understand when we look at these very small numbers. What does that really mean?
Yes,
for the people?
that's what I'm trying to figure out, the math. How does that
No, I'm
work?
with you.
But I think if I have to look at this overall and just get my general bearings, I think the work we need to do is exactly this. These little red lines, perfect. This is a huge improvement, and I think. If we're all in agreement on these things, it should be incorporated into the ordinance. The thing that we're never going to be in agreement on is that the traffic is going down. We're never going to agree that the traffic is going down. It's just not going to happen. But it doesn't need to. It's not.
Okay, I won't get into discussion.
So we don't need to. I don't think we need to.
If you look at it logically, I'm not a traffic expert.
Right, but
I'm
we're
not
going to
an
be
engineer.
conservative, and we're going to base it on parking spaces. That's as a township. That's what we're going to do, and we can all live with that. And so I think we need to move beyond that and start looking at the actual wording and asking questions like that question there. What does this really mean? And it means we could potentially have 15 feet away from the curb a parking structure. And are we okay with that? And should we move on to the next issue? That's what I think we have to decide.
I have a question on, I think it would be subparagraph B, building area and impervious coverage. So the redlined area. And I've read this a couple of times, and it appears that, well, it says in plain English, not more than 45% of the total lot area comprising the CIDC may be covered by impervious surfaces. And it goes on to appear to tell me that other areas of Villanova, for example, the campus, that are not included within the CIDC can be, that impervious area can be included to reach the 45% or not to exceed the 45%.
No. Okay.
I mean, it's my sense is, let me just finish my thought. My sense is that you're taking areas outside, the way this seems to read, outside the proposed CICD, and use that to be able to increase the impervious area within the CICD. Am I reading this incorrectly?
No, that was not, no.
Okay.
Actually, the way I see it is that you cannot exceed 45% if currently it's 45 or less.
Correct.
If it's more than that, you can be consistent or anything less. But overall, everywhere will not change. So if you, for whatever reason, are grandfathering in some impervious here, it's not going to impact your overall impervious. So say you kept the impervious very high here and didn't reduce it at all, say. That's not going to help you anywhere when you're taking into consideration your overall impervious.
Yeah, it's included.
But it's also not going to hurt you if you don't bring it down to the 45 because you're still, it's existing the way it is. Nothing's changing. We're not making any more allowable. We're not making any less allowable. We're being consistent with what we're allowing now.
But the benefit we're getting is that we're getting the stormwater management for a lot of that impervious we don't have now.
So this ordinance itself doesn't really help us in impervious. But as we know, the project itself would be an improvement for stormwater management, as you pointed out.
It doesn't hurt you, and
It doesn't help or hurt.
gonna help
It's a
on the
neutral.
stormwater management.
I have a question for Peter and I think Roger. We asked for staff comments on all of this. Obviously, you're much smarter than we are. And we haven't gotten them yet, but I'm wondering, obviously, we would want to get those staff comments before we could make any final recommendation. So where are we with that?
Madam Chairman, we were just discussing that, depending on the outcome of this meeting, we'll have Peter and Roger go over this ordinance and provide you and the Board of Commissioners with a full review.
Okay. Would
Based
either,
on your comments tonight.
are either of you prepared to give us your initial thoughts at this point, or would you rather wait and go through it bit by the whole thing at once?
I think it better to go through it all at once instead of piecemeal it. I mean, my thoughts are going to be from a legal basis. I'm not going to give you thoughts on a policy basis, but I can give you thoughts on the impervious surface. If they impose this particular use on the area where they're talking about, i.e. the parking lots, obviously the parking lots have a much greater impervious surface currently
Yes.
than what they're proposing. And, certainly that current impervious surface, I suspect, is non-conforming, and so they would have a right to continue that non-conforming impervious amount into the future. It's basically is kind of grandfathered. So with this ordinance where they're basically saying, okay, we're going to allow you to actually reduce this impervious surface and we're going to reduce it ourselves, that is a plus. Because right now what's in the ground is certainly more than even 50%. And what, if the ordinance was adopted, even if they don't change it, that would hopefully lead to a reduction in the actual impervious on the ground.
Okay, would you like to have board discussion now, or should we go to public comment first? Let's do that, because it's already 9 o'clock. Okay, we're going to open this up for public comment. Thank you all for coming. Go right ahead.
Patty Barker, I live in Rosemont, Garrett Hill. I just had a couple of comments. One is a comment I've made before, and that is that all this information that everybody's talking about tonight, we haven't seen it. So it's kind of aggravating when you try to check the websites and you try to stay on top and you want to come informed so that I can speak in an informed manner to you guys, but we don't have any of the information that you're looking at. So I want to bring up what we went through with the Garrett Hill zoning district process. And I brought this up earlier on a couple of months ago with the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners, is how about an open, transparent public process? So how do we get this information out to the residents in a timely way so that when we come to these meetings, we're not wasting your time by going, oh, wait, what does that mean when they say, and this discussion has been very informative tonight, and I appreciate all the questions that you have asked. And I appreciate your support of the community, because I absolutely agree, Regina. We're never going to agree that there's going to be less traffic. I don't care what the traffic study says, which brings up my next comment, which is that no decisions, I believe, should be made without the traffic study results. It's critical, critical. And I'm glad that Mr. Zinkowski talked about the police being involved, because is the traffic study studying the traffic on Lancaster Avenue and Ithan Avenue and all the other intersections, not just the Villanova University traffic? Because we're not just talking about Villanova University. Yes, they're going to increase the density by 1,160 students. And yes, most of those cars are going to be on campus, but yes, there's still going to be a commuter lot, and people are still going to be going in and out. And that's a piece that somebody talked about is, what about the kids who are leaving campus to come to Garrett Hill or go to Rosemont or go to the city? There's still going to be that in and out. Maybe not as much, I agree, if they are parked on campus. Again, I support Villanova trying to get more students on campus. But as Elizabeth has spoken to, and a number of the rest of you, for those of us in Garrett Hill, nothing is changing. They're going to stay in Garrett Hill. There's still going to be almost 1,000 students living off campus. I believe it was Amy who mentioned the list of things that they're keeping an eye on. What is that list? Is there a way that the public can see what that list is? What are you keeping an eye on? And my last question is, and just talking about the pedestrian bridge and Ithan and that whole pedestrian safety issue, will students still be able to cross under the bridge at Church Walk? Just a question. Anyway, thank you very much for your service and for all of your insightful comments and questions. And I hope that we're still in process and this isn't going to be passed on tonight. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Patty. Roger, are these documents up on the web yet, the ones that we received for this meeting? Or does anybody know? Steve? Do you know if these documents that we received for this meeting, if these are up on the website yet?
They are not on the website yet, but we just spoke. They'll be up as soon. We'll get the flash drive for Villanova, and everything that's been presented tonight, along with the packet, will go up tomorrow.
Okay, and can we get a message to Kevin that he's not allowed to go away again? All right. Is there more public comment?
Hello, Jim Schneller from St. David's. I want to keep Radnor safe. A lot of us want to keep Radnor safe. we've started an association because of the fact that 2 new liquor licensees are applying to, and indeed have been approved by the Board of Commissioners to erect 2 restaurants, quote, higher-end food restaurants, but with obvious signs of being highly geared towards the sit-down student clientele, right on Radnor Chester Road. That's the other side of the Blue Route. But we are concerned, and as a citizen and as one of 50,000 residents, this is just another facet of what's going wrong. And I have no intention of being critical, but Radnor Township has the lowest in the county proportion of residents to licenses. And it's something we have to keep in mind. I noticed Commissioner Madrasak mentioned that, well, we're really essentially just concerned with the numbers, the zoning code, and the more definable features of what you're going to be looking at. But actually, one of the looming and most important factors is that you have to be concerned with the residents' comfort, health, and safety, not just the students. They come first, naturally. Not just the university and the students, but everybody in the township, and this is the township artery. This is a section that's being visibly promoted as simply affected by the Blue Route. As a small example, how many of these Conshohocken students cut back through County Line? If there's going to be a traffic study, is it going to include the corner of County Line and Matson Ford? Is it going to include the corner of Conestoga and Ithan? This is all we ask for. And who's going to crunch these numbers? We have a highly reputable planning commission, but what kind of digestion is going on before you're getting the figures? Along those lines, I also wanted to make a highly recommend that you do cover the ordinance on a section-by-section vote. There is disagreement, and in the name of transparency, if you could vote on as most specific list as possible, there'd be room for democratic back and forth on those issues as you decide. It would be very dramatic, and we'd see what the mechanisms are. I noticed as a factual item that the mention of a depression, a tunnel, if you will, has just about been lost completely. I couldn't urge you in stronger terms to put in a tunnel, either at Ithan. It's wonderful to hear about 2 positions here. Naturally, any engineer would probably say, what do you do at Ithan? You put in a tunnel. I don't think the expenses are outrageous, and all I can say is Swarthmore. Just go take a look at Swarthmore. Not only does that tunnel solve completely their pedestrian problem, but there's a huge noise reduction. It's like being on the plains in the middle of town. Everybody knows how obnoxious this intersection is when the traffic's moving. I think Villanova has a deterrent to getting students to go there, as a personal theory, because when they park there with their parents and they cross that street, they think, what is this? It sounds like an airport. So, in the name of a tunnel or a gouging, I don't think I'm a dreamer. I don't think the costs are terrible. We have a gentleman who's just agreed to put in a submerged garage at the Llewellyn Mansion at great cost to what he's going to make with his project. But he did it out of good taste and out of concern for the residents. I noticed also that there are many catch basins planned. Is there a reverse study by the folks who govern riparian planning to see what catch basins that haven't been there for centuries might do? I mean, it's feasible they could have a reverse effect. From looking at the streams in the area, I know the streams after 100 years probably are quite accustomed to the runoff that happens. More so, the excavation for those 3 rain gardens and depressions is about the amount of earth they'd have to move for a tunnel. Finally, I promised I wouldn't go on. I can't emphasize you, and I hope enough, and I hope I'm not on the wrong ordinance, that there is absolutely no leeway in any ordinance in Radnor for a theater shed. I believe that the concept of an entertainment center is going to could provide you with 6 meetings alone just on that concept, if you include the traffic situation. And it's very obnoxious to me to listen to people say, 5:30 past, Radnor can put up with whatever we throw at them. Well, no, for one thing, the traffic eases off slowly to 6:30 to 7. And we're getting traffic we weren't accustomed to 5 and 7 years ago, just from normal growth. How many nights a year would we have to put up with a crowded Lancaster Pike? Again, it's our comfort, it's our safety, it's our health, it's our pedestrian health, it's our bicycling health on Lancaster Pike and the sidewalks going along it and along Ithan. There's been mention that the garage is substantially for stationary student use, and I really believe that what you need is a statement from the university. It's been said so many times that there is a no-growth policy. I think you need it in writing. I think the residents from Radnor deserve that in writing. I know you can't put out a directive to get something, but we know that this is expansion, and we know that it affects all the neighborhoods to the west as well as the east, and we know the Blue Route is not the solution. I ask, therefore, that you deny this proposal as soon as possible. We're now getting comments that there's millions of dollars spent here and there. The township has spent $1 million, probably close to 250 grand on this. Stop it before it becomes unsolvable, before the momentum is too big. Finally, one other comment about open space. What we have is really not very desirable land because of the zoning code. I believe that with this kind of effort put into a spot of undesirable land, what can we really expect from the vendor when it comes to allocating land that would set off, there's the set-off system in the other ordinance for allocating open space. This is prime territory for open space, not for purists, but from a practical point of view. It's akin to that spot, that triangle right across from where the Staples is closing. In other words, a open space created by zoning needs. What can we really expect from the vendor when they have to give us open space later on? I don't think very much. I think the majority of residents would not be shocked if you did either table this, take a really good look at what's going on, because it resembles a jigsaw puzzle that will never be solved. And please, whatever you do, vote by detail. We'd rather see 75 votes than 7.5. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment?
Hi, good evening. Philip R. from Rosemont. Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. I'll be brief. I have 3 points I'd just like to bring up that haven't been brought up already. First one is many things have been put off. It said, we can put these things off and deal with them at Saldo or later on when we do the land development. But unless I'm reading a different copy that may have changed, I'm looking at subsection 68-1-C, talks to a designation, and my copy says, wherever there's a conflict, running from the middle of the paragraph, wherever there's a conflict or inconsistency between the planned institutional district's regulations and other definitions and regulations of the zoning code or the subdivision and land development ordinance, chapter 255, the regulations set forth in this 280-68 shall govern, notwithstanding anything to the contrary in the zoning and subdivision and land development ordinances of the Township of Radnor. So unless I'm reading that wrong, whatever you say is possible, and maybe you have less of a hand in negotiating than perhaps maybe thought. So just think about that one. The second question is, have you folks received and reviewed the comments from the Delaware County Planning Commission? You have. Okay, I know you haven't talked about it tonight, though, have you? Okay. Well, before you do, or as you do, or when you do, I'd like to support their conclusion on page 8. I'll just read a small section which says, from the middle of the first paragraph of the conclusion. Furthermore, the proposed setbacks are substantially less than currently required, and they appear to have the potential to alter existing character of the PI district and adjacent neighborhood areas. For this reason, it's recommended that the setback regulations be revised to preserve the integrity of the PI district, as well as the PI zone land on the periphery of the college adjacent to the residential neighborhoods. A setback of at least 60 feet is recommended from a public right-of-way, regardless of ownership of parcels fronting on such roads. Because they're saying that this is going to change the character of that area there in our neighborhood. And they're saying that from afar. Imagine what we're saying when we're sitting right here. They're also talking about proposed building height should be no more than 50 feet along Lancaster Avenue, and they give some idea to go up a little bit more by giving up some setbacks. I'm sure you've read it, or I'll just call attention to that. I think that's very important, and they recognize the problem of density in this area. Lastly, I'd just like to, it's not a fact, it's just an idea, to remind us that we're not just talking about bricks and square feet. We're talking about a dormitory here. And dorms have the highest level of intensity. I mean, these are people-intensive things. As a matter of fact, they have 24/7 use. Right now, if I go past Lancaster Avenue in that parking lot at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, there's nothing going on there. That's not going to be the case if there's dorms there. So, in fact, under the current plan institutional ordinances, the one that we have now and the one that you're proposing, dormitories are actually given, what do you call it, they're asked for greater setbacks than things like classrooms. So here we're looking at the opposite effect, and I'm wondering if we're turning things upside down. So what I'm asking is to please be cautious, be conservative, and please wait for the traffic study so we really know what may happen when we pass this and let that be law. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Thank you, and thank you all for coming. All right, our choices now are to start going through the ordinance itself and the language. We could go through it as it's written in order, or we could go through the setbacks and height sections, because that's sort of the meat of it. But we still need at some point to go through the actual ordinance. So we can either do it, just start and see how far we get tonight, or we could just start jumping right in and talking about the setbacks. So how would you like to proceed?
You know, one thing that we have talked about tonight is that staff has not really spoken to us.
Yeah, but they're going to.
And do we want to just kind of wing it, so to speak, without their higher skill set?
I feel like
I think we
if
can.
people have
I think
opinions, we should hear them, but I wouldn't want to spend 20 minutes arguing about one setback since we haven't heard from staff yet.
Okay.
Maybe we could go through and generally, we could either go one by one and state our feelings or about any particular thing that specifically bothers us, or we could talk about it in terms of the ordinance as a whole.
Why don't we go through, if we're going to work on setbacks, Mike, if we're going to work on setbacks, why don't we start from the first paragraph in setbacks and work through it in a more formal way? So I think that way we hit everything and we don't miss something. But it's your call.
And that's how we're doing PI. We do it in sections.
Yes. And how does the board feel about doing that before we get staff comments? Would you rather just wait, or do you want to start that tonight?
I think we can put our highly personalized comments in.
And we'll just be open-minded when we hear from the staff in case
Sure.
they're not the same.
I think staff's comments are going to be, is the ordinance consistent? And it's going to be more of a language thing. I think it's going to be up to you to determine setbacks and things of that nature. And Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, they're going to look and say, okay, this is what the intent is, and is the intent achieved by this ordinance? Are we creating something bigger than what we really want to? But I think as far as the setbacks and the specific height and specific issues, that's going to be your requirement. I don't know if staff wants to get into that, because that's kind of your thing to decide. Also, I think staff can make this, after this evening, hopefully, this would then go to the Board of Commissioners, and then they would hopefully, at some point, schedule a public hearing. The public hearing would be on the entire ordinance, which would include staff changes to the ordinance as well for language purposes. So again, hopefully we can move this along this evening to at least a point where you would make recommendations to the board regarding regarding setbacks, regarding height, with the caveat, of course, that staff is going to have comments as well on it. In addition to Peter, I'm sure John Rice, the township solicitor, is going to have comments, on this as well. So, again, this is still a process that's evolving, and it's not really ending here this evening before the Planning Commission, even if it does go to the Board of Commissioners.
Normally, when we have an application for instance, a land development, the first thing we do is get our staff comments. After having a presentation from the applicant or just going over the materials ourselves, then our township, who's ever acting as the township engineer at that point, goes through it with us. And that's normally how we get those staff comments on those kinds of projects. We haven't done as many of these, but I would not want to have all of our comments worked out amongst us without getting that input from the staff. I understand that they will on their own also make recommendations to the Board of Commissioners when the time is right for that, and they can make their own changes to the ordinance that they're proposing. But I wouldn't be comfortable proceeding to a recommendation without that. How does everyone else feel?
Well, I agree with that.
I agree with that.
Okay. All right. Does anyone feel that they'll be in a position tonight to make a recommendation one way or the other on this ordinance? No. I mean, Villanova has requested that we move forward, so I want to put it out there.
This has been before the township for a year.
Not before us.
Not before you, but it's been before you. This is the third time, I guess, since January it's been before you. So we're talking 3 or 4 months. But, it's been there for a long time already. If we come back next month, it'll be the 4th time before this Planning Commission. We've already been here 3 times. It's been before the township for a year. I just requested that the matter move along. Certainly, we know the township's going to make comments, and the Board of Commissioners will probably accept the township's staff's comments regarding language.
This is the largest thing we've looked at. Luella Court had 16 or 18 meetings before it finally got built between different boards, and probably a similar timeline. And this is probably 50 times the dollar amount and impact. Yeah. I don't want to rush it personally. I mean, I appreciate that there's a timeline for Villanova too. I went to Villanova, and I like my experience and all that, but this is I don't like rushing it, and it feels like we're rushing it. We don't have the traffic piece.
But you're going to have that.
We're working PI. If you want to talk about suffering in public, PI has been going on forever, and I don't see an end to it.
We're suffering through that one too.
I don't see an end to it, and the PI thing is so different. I was just briefly commenting before the meeting. It's like PI is an alternate universe to the CICD. In PI, we talk about 50-foot buildings have to be 600 feet from a street, and here we're talking about 5 feet.
That's interesting that Delaware County Planning Commission says the 50
well,
I
appreciate another opinion, but 60 feet is different from 5 feet too.
Maybe on setbacks, if we want to start we have to eventually start working on some of these numbers. And it might be easier just to look at isolated setbacks on the chart and say what really gives us trouble on some of these numbers.
Go through, as you said, go through the ordinance paragraph by paragraph.
Whichever, but we need to start getting, it does kind of, you can zero in on one particular thing or not, and then once you kind of maybe get these numbers to a place where we like them, see how it plugs into the ordinance.
See, I think staff can review parts of the ordinance that, in terms of language, such as the paragraph that you mentioned earlier, that or someone mentioned that the CICD ordinance will trump the PI ordinance if there's a conflict. That's something that Peter would eventually address, I would think, and resolve it appropriately. But
that's just one of the things we can provide to you is we can kind of explain or simplify some of the language and explain the impact of the language. The other, items that I'm going to provide is I will make suggestions on a legal basis saying I wouldn't recommend to the township to accept this language. What you need to recognize is that this is a request by an applicant to adopt an ordinance. You don't have to adopt it in any way, shape, or form. And you can make whatever adjustments or changes you want to change the ordinance into a form that you think is appropriate for the township. Now, obviously, you change it too much, and then it doesn't work for the applicant. So it kind of ruins the whole, purpose here. But certainly, Roger and myself, I think, what we would do here, unlike land development where Roger and myself are looking at it and saying doesn't meet our ordinance needs, here we're going to be trying to explain it to you, give you recommendations on whether or not we think this is something that's appropriate, that's good for the township, and also try to maybe say recommend changes. But ultimately, a lot of the issues we're going to leave up to you. We're going to say here's what it's proposing, here's our recommendations. You guys, it's a policy decision that's up for you and ultimately the Board of Commissioners then to make.
So I guess I'm still a little unclear on the process. This portion of the process is to make recommendations to the Board of Commissioners.
Yes.
The board is looking to you to say either basically we don't recommend adopting the ordinance, we do recommend adopting the ordinance, or we recommend adopting the ordinance with the following changes.
So at what point would you be giving us the feedback that you just discussed?
I think what Steve, the township would like Roger and I to do is to prepare that and to provide that to you prior to the next meeting.
So in your opinion, does it make the most sense to point out anything that we are uncomfortable with tonight and then the next meeting make our recommendation?
We have kind of, there's a chicken and an egg problem here where, Roger and I can certainly point out and highlight issues that might streamline your discussions at next meeting, but at the same time, you might have issues yourself that if you now highlight, it will streamline our review.
So I guess what I'm thinking is that what makes the most sense, and correct me if this is wrong, is for us to point out particularly a setback or a height or this or that, not wording, et cetera. And then you would come back to us with, look, this is what you're approving next time. And we have to say, okay, we're okay with that, or let's change the words, and then go forward from there. Is that the right?
Somewhat, yeah. One of the things we're going to, Lisa, I'm going to point out to you, say, is, well, here's the setback that they're recommending, and they need it because they need it for the garage along Ithan. But please recognize that the way the ordinance language is written is that this setback would apply to, X structures along Y streets, and you need to keep that in mind to make sure, recognize that, it's not specific to that one particular building along that one particular street, but it's applicable across the board or those sort of things. So, we would provide that, one of the things we would provide to you to try to expand it beyond the plan and for you to understand what is the actual impact of that particular language.
So I guess what I would say from my viewpoint, my concerns are, I'm not quite sure I understand the whole fly loft and whether that's allowed now and whether we're consistent with now. That one is still a question mark in my mind. I can see that a lot of people are uncomfortable with that setback. But my main concern is that we're increasing density and we're not offsetting it. And that's not what we're doing in our PI that we're discussing in general. And I guess I'm wondering if there could be some type of provision that would calculate the increase in density that wouldn't be permitted under the existing ordinance and calculate a certain amount of open space dedication to offset that. And so you'd have a net equivalent development at the existing ordinance. Does that make sense? So is that something that is even doable?
Yes.
Okay, so my recommendation is that we incorporate that.
I had a question for the applicant, just because of the open space thing. You're aware of the new park and rec thing. What is your thoughts on that in terms of how Villanova would like to respond? Would you rather do the fee in lieu, or would you rather do the open space?
Yeah, we really haven't considered it at this point. Now, one thing I would recall, I don't have the ordinance in front of me, but the open space is very drastic, if I recall correctly. I mean, you're talking about something of the nature of 3,500 square feet of building, not footage, of building. You're supposed to donate almost a similar amount in open space.
Yeah, Kevin's not here, but he said that a residential unit would be, a dorm room would be a residential unit as opposed to a commercial building. So there's two different sets of standards right there.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. I thought it was based on square footage too. I don't even know how that would affect this development. Treating it.
And then
so you're talking, you're talking 1,000 dorm
Well,
rooms,
but see,
and
there,
that's,
but it might not be that.
500,000.
No, but
I mean,
see,
you're talking
the design of the dorm.
more land than Villanova owns.
No, the design of the dorm might mitigate that. If it's a pod with like 4 bedrooms and a center living area and 2 baths, that might be considered an apartment, et cetera. With 6 beds or 4 beds. So there's different issues that I didn't like the ordinance for what it's worth, and I voted against it, but it's the law now, so that's that.
And we're aware it's on the books.
And that, as a fee in lieu, would be a huge number. It would be like $3 million by itself.
It's a large number.
Yes. But so you don't know how you'll respond to
aware
that?
It's a large number.
Okay. Or it's a lot of land.
Or a lot of land, probably more land than we own, but.
Can you speak on the whole, not that set aside? I think there's probably avenues for mitigating that, like for negotiating that. But would that make sense to you as an institution to go ahead and say, okay, we're increasing development in this site because it makes sense for everyone involved. Now, the increase yield that we're getting out of this site, we're willing to offset that with land somewhere else. Is that something that could be done?
Again, I can't give a definitive answer on it. We would certainly look at it to see if something can be done in that regards. And again, remember, not to bring up the institutional ordinance, but I think my comments before on that I thought that was pretty draconian, what you were asking for. That an institution just wouldn't do it because it was too draconian what you were asking for in return for the increased density in the ordinance, in the proposed ordinance.
We're still working on it.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm putting the ball back in your court. You know what we're looking for. Take a look at what you have and what makes sense for you that you can do and can offer in terms of that type of agreement, in terms of the increased yield in here being somehow offset elsewhere so that when you're overall said and done, you're not going to end up with more development or significantly more development than you would have if we didn't pass this.
Yeah. I understand, and we've had this discussion on the institutional ordinance too, that the whole intent here is to preserve the land around the residential area, which our intent all along with where we're locating this is several hundred feet from residential areas. And that's why we thought this was a good idea. We looked at other areas, and this was the best area for both the institution and for the township as to where to locate this type of development. Again, an answer to your question is something we would look at. I don't know what the response would be. And again, if it's going to be too draconian, we just can't do it.
That's why I'm saying that you come back to us with something that works, or that you can suggest that we accept, because I think the way it stands now, it's kind of like, oh, we'll take care of that in the special use process, but I don't think the residents are going to be satisfied with that. I think that if you look at the situation where you're building this and it makes sense to do so the way you're doing it, you are bringing a lot of new residents into that area, and by saying that somewhere else will not have dorms on it or will not have additional buildings on it, I think that helps to offset the impact of bringing all these new residents into the area. And even though there's students that are there during the day now, and I understand that. So it doesn't have to be necessarily apples for apples.
Yeah, and Regina, to be quite frank, we don't know what the all-in number is yet. We've heard this evening that we're talking about something with additional stormwater management, additional sewage disposal systems, additional right-of-ways. And so we're here negotiating with you, and then we're going to be somewhere else negotiating with someone else, and we just don't know what the all-in number is. And that's what we're really trying to get at is, what is this development going to cost, and we're going to be able to do it once we know what the all-in number is going to be.
But Nick, you said tonight that you were incorporating comments of planning in the red line.
Correct.
We have made these comments before, and they have been vague and general, but we have made comments about where's our open space, how do we compensate for the density, and I would like to see it literally in the ordinance, not just something to be worked out eventually. And in terms of a cost issue, I appreciate that a second pedestrian bridge is an expensive thing, but if you already own 150 acres, you're not going to buy those 6 or 10 acres that you dedicate as open space. You already own them. So in terms of being all in, that's probably the least of the costs.
Well, how are we going to proceed? Are we going to start working on some specific numbers, or?
I want to wrap up at 10 tonight, if that's,
Okay.
people can make it till 10, yeah. So we have about a half an hour. I suggest, after the discussion we just had, that we bring up, for instance, Virginia brought up a point that is specifically important to her, but that we've all talked about and we agree with. If there are other things like that, let's bring them up. And after that, let's go through the setbacks, because that's a lot of the nitty-gritty. Does that sound good? I mean, we may not get through it all, but I think we should, that's what we should be working on.
I would recommend we do setbacks first.
I would like to ask one question of the group. How do people feel generally at this point? Obviously, we've been doing this for months. Are we going to go through all of these things, and then people might say, well, I just don't think we should have conditional use, the big picture items. Are people, is the board comfortable with the direction that we're going, where if we could amend this so that we liked it and it worked, is it something that we would recommend approval of?
My feeling is that I think the development is basically nice looking.
Yes.
But it's big.
Yes.
I have a major concern with the setbacks. And I, quite truthfully, no matter what Sue said, I would rather see this there than the parking lot.
Sure.
I also have some concerns with some of the uses in addition to the residential halls they're putting in there, like the amount of commercial business.
Okay.
Because I feel that's going to be pulling from the businesses in both Bryn Mawr and in Wayne with some of the things that they're putting there, and I'm not sure that's necessary to do it.
Right.
It's nice maybe to have, but if they have to cut back on the size of it, maybe they could cut back on some of that commercialism. I think the height of the building I'm not as concerned with as I am with the closeness to the street.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
And I'd be willing to give maybe on that side, as we've done in the past, at least we did.
But we don't
in
have to
zoning.
negotiate it.
Yeah.
We can just say what we like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, but I really cannot see these buildings 10, 15, 20 feet from the edges. I think we need buffers, especially along, for example, the railroad tracks, citing specifically Alden Lane, because of all those trees come down. They need that. That's their backyard there. Mm-hmm. And yes, it's on Villanova property, but there's trees there now. Mm-hmm. And I think they need some sort of buffer in these areas. The fly loft at 80 feet is huge.
Yeah.
But maybe that can be designed in a way that it could be handled. The parking and calculating on the theater, I think they need to look at what other meeting rooms there might be in there, where other things could be going on at the same time. So I think you need to look at some of that.
Okay.
When you have a long building where they said that you could have a setback of 90 degrees of 2 feet in depth, I don't think that's enough on a building that's 300 feet long to really give you a difference. And they're not doing that. They have much more of an angled thing going on there. So I think maybe that needs to be changed a bit to make that greater, so that if you're looking at a 360-foot-long building, 2 feet is nothing. It's like a window.
Yeah, Kathy, I'm sorry to interrupt you on that. That really provision for the 360 is a parking structure, which, as we know right now, is not a building under the current code.
But it's
We're
becoming
anticipating that it may be
becoming a
changed
building.
in the near future, and so that's why we put in.
Is that
really-
specifically on the building structure there?
Yeah, that's really where
I
that
missed
number comes from, is on the parking
Okay,
structure.
that's
I
fine.
mean, it's not, the dorms are, I think we've measured is about 180 feet is the longest.
Yeah, and then they're at right
dimensional dorm.
angles, and
Yeah,
they
and they're-
make,
yeah, right,
yeah,
yeah.
and that's attractive looking.
Right.
Okay.
It's the parking structure is the one that really bangs up the building length. And again, technically, as I said, it's not a building right now, so we probably were safe, but we're anticipating that may be changed. So.
Okay, who else has general?
I'm sorry.
I'd like to
Are you
add
done?
something. I'd like to add, I think, Kathy, you really have covered a lot of the areas that concern me, and I just want to voice my concerns that from the first time I heard about this, and I'm still relatively new to the process, I generally agree. I think it's got the germ of a good idea. I also think it'd be a lot better looking than the parking lot that's sitting there right now, with all the other environmental problems that presents, as well as it's not very nice to look at. However, it is a suburban community, and the concerns of the residents, not just for parking, I mean, not just for the traffic issues, which is an issue that's going to have to be clarified, I believe. It's also the monumentality of having these structures, which are good-looking structures, but perhaps a little too big and a little too close to the road. We want to maintain the suburban character of this community in which we live. And I've seen elsewhere, not just here, but in other parts of the country, where institutions have begun to build large structures, and it changes the character of the community. And I think Villanova, I respect and understand that Villanova wants to maximize the use of the property in a way that doesn't offend the residents and does not change the character of the property. It's a wonderful sentiment. But I think something else is going to have to be done in order to get this passed. That's what I feel, and I think as we go through these setbacks, you're going to see that there's going to be changes that will have to be made. I'm not saying that it's going to get passed, but I'm saying that those considerations have got to be taken into consideration and be perhaps willing to be accepted by Villanova. One of my primary concerns when I looked at the model and also looked at some of the photographs and the renderings that you've been kind enough to show us, is that the Performing Arts Center, aside from many traffic issues it may, in fact, will create, I'm sure, is the size of that building sitting smack dab up against Lancaster Avenue. I just don't see how it's just not, even the field house, which is, I guess, bigger, is set far enough back that it's not really an issue. Or maybe it's just been sitting there so long, we're all used to it. One or the other, but it's just not the same thing. And I think those are issues that you have to keep in mind as we go through this process. I'm not prepared to sit here and just plug numbers into what ought to be the setback. I think I need to have perhaps some other input. I'm not sure what that is, but that's where I feel. I just feel like it's a little too big and a little too close for right now.
Thank you. Skip, you were cut off.
In terms of the size of the buildings, we're going from 160 to 350. So it's more than double. I understand. Let me preamble this. I like the idea of a development on the parking lot. Like almost everyone else that has spoken so far has said the same thing. It makes sense. You're getting rid of a giant heat island. It can be attractive. I think the setbacks are a bigger problem for me than the building heights. I think if all you have left is a sidewalk and a 4-foot strip of grass, that's not aesthetically pleasing in a suburban setting. It's not Penn's campus, it's Villanova. I mean, the other side of the street, what a contradiction. There's the 20th century on one side, and here we are with the ugly 21st century on the other in some respects. How will you fit trees in a 5-foot setback? I mean, that can be any canopy tree ever. You can't. So we've said in 50 projects, well, if we had that many, because this board has said, oh, this is too much on this site, it's too dense, it's too big. These are really too close. I have a bigger problem with the closeness to the streets, and I don't buy entirely into the argument at all that just because you own the property on either side, it shouldn't matter. The building height, I think there are tall buildings, and the topography on the other side, the buildings look tall, even if they aren't. So it maybe fits the character of that area. I like, and I might be the only one on this board, I actually think traffic will be neutral, maybe tiny bit even less. Because if you hew hard to the idea that only residents or mainly residents park in that garage, that should cut down the number of trips. I would love to see, as Regina has said, some dedicated plan in, you're creating the ordinance, create an open space piece in it too.
Yeah, I go along with almost all the comments that were here. I'm much more focused on open space, as I've said a number of times. I wonder why we're doing this ordinance and then the PI ordinance separately. They seem to me to be, you know, this almost should be like a subsection of that PI ordinance if we're going to make an exception or something like that. I wonder why we're doing two separate ones.
Well, it will be. If this were adopted and the new PI were adopted, this would be, tell me if I'm wrong, Peter, but this would be like a subsection of the new PI. Yes, it would be. Yeah. Using a conditional use.
All right, well, then I think we should be talking about the whole thing at the same time rather than two separate things. But that's, I think, I have been a very strong proponent of much larger setbacks. Heights, as he says, I'm not thrilled with height, but I much prefer a taller building further away. I think I'm the one who brought up the Penn campus analogy, but you wanted my opinion.
Did you have something else, Liz?
Sure. I would like to just echo that, you know, again, the idea of replacing the parking lot with an attractive, purposeful structure makes sense. I do like the idea of the open space, but I would like to see if we could apply that to that area in particular, because many of the residents won't be able to benefit from it if it's removed. So in other words, if the open space can be on the street side, and so that we can enjoy more of the feeling of the area still and not lose the characteristics of the area.
Well, I think it's encouraging that we pretty much are in agreement with what we want. Now we'll have to iron out the numbers, and no one's saying absolutely not, no matter what we decide, I don't want to do it. You know, so that's encouraging. Peter, is it more productive for us to give these kinds of comments back to the Villanova team and say, make an amendment to this? Or is it more productive for us to just take it on our own at this point and decide to either make our own changes and recommend it to the commissioners or not? I mean, what's the best process?
Well, I think in part it's up to how flexible Villanova is. You know, if they're saying, oh, yeah, we can address all these things, then maybe, yeah, leave it to Villanova. But if Villanova says, look, what you're suggesting is going to blow our proposed project out of the water, we can't, then, you know, sending it back, putting it back in their court is going to get you nowhere. I mean, you can ask Nick, see what his response are. I think a lot of your comments were very nebulous. I mean, you focus on certain areas, but how the specific changes need to be made, I think you're leaving him guessing, in which case I suspect he'll make changes, but they're probably not going to be nearly as substantial enough as you.
I would prefer if the board, you know, if the board wanted to increase setbacks and make a recommendation that setbacks be increased, then you know, do it. You know, and I understand Regina's comment, and we'll consider that and see if there's something we can come, and everyone's comment about, you know, some sort of open space dedication or non-use of land or something of that nature. I understand where you're coming from on that. I don't know if we can, but, you know, we'll look at it.
Can we take the courtyard approach that's been presented on the plan within the, like the buildings creating their own courtyard, and kind of flip that inside out so that the courtyards are on the perimeter of the building? In other words, they're kind of the open space is not within the cluster of buildings, but around the perimeter.
I know Villanova spent hundred thousands, if not millions of dollars on this design already, so, I'll approach it with them, but I don't know
Okay.
how far.
I would just say that with the open space, my intention is not so much the classic open space. It's the balancing of the development. It's the balancing of the yield, really. So I'm not really looking, maybe other people would prefer to have a park. I'm just looking for you not to be able to increase your overall yield so much so that we regret allowing this cluster.
I understand.
I have one question for Villanova, if I could. If you were to take out some of those commercial usages that you wanted to put in the first floor of the dormitories, would you be able to then reduce the overall size of those buildings so that you could pull them in more from the and give us larger setbacks?
I don't know the answer to that.
My recollection from prior testimony is it's only 17,000 square feet.
Very small, and it's not really desirable space for, for dorms on the first floor. That's why we had them there.
One thing we can possibly do in the ordinance is put a percentage limitation on that commercial type use, which the ordinance does not have right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right now it says basically not, maybe we can quantify.
Yeah, according to what's written in here, you could pretty much have a shopping center in there with the
And that's not
exception
the intent.
of a
That's
supermarket.
not the
Yeah, we're
intent.
happy to limit that.
Okay.
Okay, do you guys want to talk about the numbers now? Okay. Let's go to our beautiful chart that we have. Okay. All right. For the setbacks on Lancaster Avenue, I'm assuming this last column is referencing the development plan, the sketch plan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. So that's helpful. Do you want to just take them one at a time, or? Okay. The residence buildings. The existing PI zoning is 120. The current recommendation is 30. That's one of the things we've been talking about, pulling those buildings back further from Lancaster. I personally could recommend a number, but I didn't know. I was thinking 50 would work and give you enough room for trees and grass and sidewalks.
I was thinking 60.
60. Okay, 50 to 60.
But I could split it.
Well, for tonight, we'll just put 50 to 60 and
Okay.
see if anybody have a different opinion.
55.
I'm not sure how this is all going to work in the end. How is this all going to work if we start
we got to put
revising
some
these numbers?
numbers in.
Because
We got to get moving.
I personally would
asking for
have to
guidance.
say that if we had an open space provision, I'm done. I'm done. Like
I'm
I
not.
don't. I'm not saying I want
Yeah, I'm
larger
not.
setbacks. So how does that come across in the end at a vote?
Well, you would say leave it the way it is.
But that's not going to be an option. We're either going to approve or disapprove
Well,
with
that happens all the
recommendations.
time
So
anyway.
how is that all going to work?
If half of us say leave it the way it is, and half of us say 50
Are we going to
feet,
vote on
then we
all of
have a
these
tie.
issues now?
We
How
can't
is
have a
that going to
tie.
work? That's what I'm
Well,
wondering.
I-
How are we going to come to?
I think we just need, there's so much here, we can't make one decision the whole night. We need to start
Discuss
working
them.
through the nitty-gritty.
So are
you're
we
just
going
saying
to
you're not
vote
that-
on each of these different issues? How is that going to work?
I think what we're going to do is discuss each of the issues, not vote on them, but discuss them, and then come to a consensus, and then someone will make a motion about maybe a portion of it, and if people are in agreement, and we should know by then kind of where we stand.
So when we pass this on, are we going to vote on each individual item and pass those decisions on to the board? Or are we going to take one vote up or down and pass that on to the board? That's what I'm confused. I don't understand the process.
Why can't we just change the parts we don't like and then vote on the whole thing?
I was thinking that
So you're saying one
rather
vote
than
up
vote
or
on
down?
everything, just
No,
discuss everything.
after we tweak it.
Right, but that's one vote
like
on
an
the entire.
informal vote on individual things, and then a big vote at the end. That's the formal vote.
Because I don't want to say, I don't recommend the changes that we've made and vote against it. If I'm in favor of the whole thing, with less strict. So
Well,
how does that work?
Regina,
how
normally
does the whole process work?
Normally, you do take one up and down vote at the end.
Okay.
And I think, as Julie has and Skip have described, you normally will go through an ordinance. You'll try to have a discussion. You'll try to reach a consensus or as close to a consensus on the certain issues, and then you can have an up and down vote at the very end. If any one of the planning commissioners has a particular issue that they want to focus on, at that vote, you can either vote yes or no, and you can say, hey, I'm voting yes, but this particular item I disagree strongly with, or I'm voting no because I don't agree with the changes being made. You can add comments to your vote or conditions to your vote that are going to be reflected in the minutes that will be passed on to the Board of Commissioners. It is an up or down vote, but that doesn't mean it's a monolithic vote on your part.
So the ultimate end result would likely be that we're going to recommend approval with these changes, or we're going to recommend not to approve it because of these problems. So one or the other.
Correct.
Okay.
They will have not only our vote, but also our specific recommendations. Whether we vote for or against it, what they'll have is the things we were concerned about.
For that first item, I feel like that I would want to leave it where it is on Lancaster, because I'd rather, if we keep pushing them in from both sides, they're going to be so constricted. And I do want them the opportunity to construct, but I think I'd rather have it on Ithan, on a non-arterial road where there's more residents. I'd rather let them have the setback they're asking for on Lancaster, but be more stringent on Ithan.
Madam
So I
Chairman.
think maybe balance that a little better, like balance the setbacks so we get what we need on Ithan and also get what we need on Lancaster. And for the purposes of just this conversation, when I say 50-foot setback, I want 50 feet from the curb. And we'd have to figure out what that setback is, because we had that discussion about, well, where's the right-of-way. But in terms of...
And that may not...
Thank you. Go ahead. Now, you get it.
And that issue that you're asking, like we mentioned before, may not be addressed until land development, depending on the right-of-way widths that are required from any improvements that come as part of that process.
You look in our subdivision land development ordinance under arterials, which is what Lancaster Avenue is, the footnote is, as recommended by the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. So when this gets to land development and there may or may not be a turning lane that is required, PennDOT could drastically change what that right-of-way is in the area of this project. So I'm just recommending that the Commission keep that in mind.
Well,
No
then
different than...
how would we address this? If in our minds we want to, like if we wanted to say, regardless of how wide Lancaster Avenue and its right-of-way end up, we want 40 feet from this curb. How do we discuss that and make that come out in the ordinance?
Well, I'm going to use Ithan Avenue as an example. In the Saldo, Ithan is a minor collector with a 60-foot right-of-way and a 36-foot cartway. It does not have a 36-foot cartway currently. Let's say as part of the land development process, a 36-foot wide North Ithan Avenue was constructed. In that 60-foot right-of-way, there would be a 12-foot shoulder on either side of the curb. So from the edge of curb, you would have an additional 12 feet for the sidewalk, plantings, and all. And at the edge of that 12 feet, that's where that setback line begins. Now, that's as wide as that shows, but I don't mean to confuse matters even more, but let's say that after all this, at the top of Ithan, it turns that we need a left straight right, and there's another turning lane coming eastbound Lancaster Avenue. It would definitely change the configuration of all this in a great way. I guess what the Planning Commission has to keep in mind is we either deal with center of road, so in a 60-foot right-of-way, the edge of the right-of-way is 30 foot from the center of the road and 80 foot. That's about knowing that you're going to have a verge for a sidewalk, then your sidewalk and your plantings. That's a little bit of the chicken before the egg that was previously discussed. We're looking at, I'm giving you chapter and verse of a land development ordinance when we're looking at a zoning amendment.
So we'd all like to resign now.
But if we say that we want it 50 feet from the curb, can't Peter just write the language that makes it work?
Yes. I think the only downfall of that language is if PennDOT on Lancaster says all of a sudden they want a 120-foot setback, and that setback line is actually greater than our building or our setback line, then you get a little confusion. But yeah, it's certainly from a legal standpoint very easily we can write it that way. It's enforceable that way. But just recognize that if you're not measuring it from the right-of-way line, you could have an overlap, and you could have an overlap that encompasses the entire setback.
But if there's a conflict between PennDOT and our ordinance, won't PennDOT trump
Yes.
it? Okay.
On Lancaster, yes.
Okay.
I do want to make one quick point. From the edge of the white over there to the white over there is about 60 feet. That's the setback that you want from the curb to the front of a 5-story building off Lancaster Avenue. Is that what you're thinking about?
That's 60 feet. It always looks different indoors, but yeah. Mhm.
It's kind of better to have a visual.
And Doug, it's not like, okay, we're okay with 50 feet, but some of us want to know how we reduce density elsewhere on campus. Besides, in other words, that maybe makes sense right there. Maybe. And you can disagree, I know you do, which is okay.
I don't disagree.
You want it to look like the other side of the street.
Well, that's not happening.
All right, what did we decide there? 50, 60?
I like that, but it was not
Well, we're
happening.
generally thinking 50 or 60, but not everybody agrees. But that's, kind of what the thought is on that first
I can go
one.
with your 50 on that.
All right.
Because I think you have a very valid point on IFIN, so if we need to give a little bit there to take a little bit elsewhere.
Now, the parking garage, yeah, we're guessing at 50 feet right now. This is, yeah, we're not voting on this. This is just a general discussion. We're thinking maybe 50 feet. Right, and they have 38.5. It's not that different. So, the parking garage existing is 120. That's staying the same, 120, and I believe the parking garage is further back behind. Because of where it's sited, that's not going to be an issue. Does anyone have any comments on that?
Yeah, that's 120 feet from what? From Lancaster? Okay.
I mean, for instance, if someone wanted to put a parking garage right on Lancaster, that's not what the plan shows here, but if that was happening,
well,
it's 120 feet setback, and that seems reasonable to me.
It seems kind of screwy to me to have a parking garage 120 feet back and have the Performing Arts Center 10 feet.
Well, we haven't gotten to that one yet.
Yeah, I know, but why does the parking garage need such a big one?
Parking garages are ugly.
Well, they could
They're
be more
hideous,
attractive.
but they never are.
Yeah. All right, pick a number.
Well, it's 120 now. They're not changing
Okay.
it, so we can
All
just
right.
leave it. I'll go back, and we'll have to look at what we're proposing in the PI for our new PI. The Performing Arts Center, they have 10 feet off of Lancaster. I think that's too small.
Absolutely.
I don't mind that building being on Lancaster, even though it's a very large building, because it's a theater. It's it's suitable for the campus.
Well, you frequently have large numbers of people coming out the front door and congregating, and you need to have a large enough area there to accommodate them.
Right, that's going to be land development.
And then you need to have, but if your setback is 10, you're not going
Right.
to have that space. And then you need some greenway there. So I wouldn't go
Do you think it
less than
should be
50.
the same as the residences or different?
Well, with their current plan, I would say probably 50.
Question. Do you have any idea how far the front of the field house is off Lancaster Avenue curb?
Looks about 40.
Just a ballpark. I mean,
That's a good question, Doug, because we can picture that in our minds. We know what that looks like. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been looking at it. All right, where are the engineers? Okay, we're just going to circle back. What'd you come up with? Okay. Well, they're working on it.
It looks like about 50 is from curb.
From the curb. And even though we keep saying setback, we mean generally from the curb. And Peter's going to translate that into language that...
But my point was, if you had a performing arts center that same distance from the curb on the opposite side of the street, would you consider that to be enough space in front of it? That's the reason I asked that question.
I think I would, depending on the design, of course, but yes. Do you? How about you? Okay. So that's another 50. Surface parking. It's not applicable for this current plan because they don't have surface parking right there, but if there were to be surface parking there, 60 is how it's written, and that's what's in the existing PI. Is everyone comfortable with that?
Yes.
It doesn't go all the way out to Eichen Avenue, right? It's just a driveway to Eichen Avenue. And that one in the back along.
No, we're not talking about the plan. We're talking about the ordinance. If somebody put a parking lot there and didn't do this plan, but did another plan. Okay. So that's the same as the existing.
Okay.
Now, off of Eichen, we have some big changes. The residence building, existing is 120, proposed is 15.
They're showing 37 off the curb.
Right. You want to stay consistent and stay with 50? All right.
Well, or more.
And then the parking garage, that one
It's that one little corner in the back that goes to 5.
yeah.
Yeah, but that gives them,
But the whole building could be there according to this. So what would you be comfortable with?
I wonder if there's a functional reason that they need that little notch. In other words, maybe you could say 5% of the building can have that setback, but everything else has to be more?
I think that's a little too detailed.
Too detailed? Did you hear that, Peter?
I heard halfway through the conversation,
Well,
unfortunately.
like, for example, on that big thing, the biomed thing,
Right.
one of the things they do is they wanted a setback variance to connect the garage.
Right.
So if there's a reason that the garage has to, one small portion of it, let's say less than 10%, has to be closer to the street than the rest of the building, is that something you could craft language for?
Oh, certainly, yes.
If everyone agrees with that.
Yes, that's
Okay,
something I could write.
All right. But in general, what setback would you be comfortable with for a
Well-
parking garage off of Eichen?
Why don't we ask our Eichen commissioner for a second?
I feel like the
Because you were
parking-
saying you wanted to get a little bit more buffer there.
Well, the parking garage isn't as high as the residences are.
Right.
So I feel like there could be plus you really want people to be able to access the sidewalks and use the proper travel methods and not be cutting across areas that shouldn't be cut across. And so I feel like the access has to be good for the parking garage to be able to utilize. So I could definitely see it being closer to Eichen than the residences.
Yeah, I agree.
And I do like the idea of percentage because, stairwells and things like that aren't, or get pulled out from the structure for access are good.
Right.
So I would like to see a little bit of an increase just so it allows for the ability to still have plantings in there if the right-of-way gets increased.
For plantings, because it's going to be hideous. I'm sure it's going to be, as parking garages go, it's going to be lovely, but,
Well, the nice thing about plantings is that it helps to direct traffic too. I mean, where there are
And
openings.
you can say there's no residences on either side of that street, but people are headed for their homes. It's still a residential neighborhood.
But like the hedge that Villanova has up there, it really does direct where the people can come and go. So allowing plantings there helps to direct the number of people from crossing Eichen Avenue at the wrong spot. Because we all know it's the least resistance to just run across such a short, small street. But if the plantings and a fence or something are there, it really can direct the pedestrians to where they need to be. So we need to leave enough room to allow that to happen.
So I'm going to recommend 30 feet. Does that sound about where you were headed?
I'll be honest with you, it's hard to pick a number without seeing the impact on the drawings and the picture as well.
Well,
but
they're at 23.7 feet now. And I'd
Okay.
like, you think 35?
Yeah, I think we could do 30.
All right, I'm putting 35. All right. For tonight, just for tonight, we're putting 35. The Performing Arts Center from Eichen, that's a big building. It's going to have an 80-foot fly loft, possibly. So how much of a setback? Now, they have put 20 in as their proposal, although the building apparently is currently at 83.6, which seems... Right, so why don't we put 60? Okay.
What are we doing with that? Was that 60 feet?
We were thinking 60. They're already at 80, so that'll work.
One comment, the Performing Arts Center, even if the fly loft is unpleasantly high, it's going to be at the back of the building. It's not going to be.
Yeah, but it's the front. It's the closest part to the neighbors.
Well, they do
Oh.
there. They do fields.
With the,
We're going to have to get a picture of a fly loft so we all know what we're talking about. Okay. Okay, so that covers, surface parking. It's not applicable in their current plan, but they're proposing 60, which is the same as existing, so that seems reasonable. Okay, we're fine with that. Now, against the 100 right-of-way, that's the railroad, right? In the back. Residences, buildings bordering the right-of-way. How big is that right-of-way? How far is that, like, from the tracks? I mean, is that a big, I mean, if
I
you
don't
have
think it's very wide, but I couldn't tell you a number.
I mean, if it was 100 feet, that would be very different than if it's 20 feet.
I think we have it on 90.
It's 90? You have 60?
Nick, that's
I'm
the
trying to
total
find-
right-of-way width, 90, correct? The total right-of-way width.
The rate is 90, okay. So that's 90. Yeah, I think that's fine.
It varies. It's variable. I mean,
Yeah.
it almost touches it as you get further west.
Okay. Residences bordering the R3 district property line. It's currently 200. And the current submission, they'd like to bring that down to 60. 71 feet is what they're proposing in their sketch plan. Does anybody have any feeling on that? I mean, I think 200 is not necessary, but you want to go with 100?
This is, remember, there's a little bit,
Well, they're proposing 60.
this isn't, just so everyone knows, it's not. This isn't a residential, there's a strip of land that's right here, if you have your.
Wait, he's going to put it up. Hang on.
Is he going to put it up? There's an area right here. That's the R3, we have no idea why, but that's
okay.
zoned R3. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about this R3 zone that's in the parking lot.
So whatever setbacks we have from the 100 right-of-way is going to cover that, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So, okay. I'm fine with that.
So that means go with their number.
Just go with their number, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Nick. Parking garage from that right-of-way? I would ask staff to look into that. I don't mind that it's close, but I want to make sure it's not really 5 feet, because if you have an emergency and you need to get between the parking garage and the railroad tracks for some reason, you need a little space.
I think you need at least 15 for fire equipment.
All right, let's say 20 for tonight, and we'll revisit it.
Okay.
Yes, but that might be sloped, or, you know, I don't know what the situation is there.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Surface parking bordering the Route 100 right-of-way. Those are all zeros. Does anybody have a feeling about that?
It's zero in PI now.
And all of these setbacks, staff will give us their comments on as well, so we have their opinions as well at the next meeting.
I think what's already zero in PI now, it's probably
It's
okay.
probably, okay. Surface parking bordering that R3 district property line. Now, Nick, is that the same line that has no meaning? All right, then I think zero is fine there. The Performing Arts Center. It doesn't exist in the PI zoning, and they have 60, which I'm okay with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On there, yeah.
Okay.
What were you on the parking garage? Where it was?
I was going to say let's put 20 for now
20.
and ask the staff for their opinion. Okay, I think we made some progress.
Julie, what, for Ithan, what was the setback for residences?
50.
Thank you.
As a matter of fact, Madam Chair, I think between the four of us, could you run down your list because we all have different pieces of that?
Okay.
I have a copy we can give him.
What?
I can get that from you after the meeting.
Skip's
for
got a
staff.
nice clean copy he's going to give you.
Thank you.
And this is just where our discussion landed today. This is not what we're voting on. This is kind of to find out what we're thinking at this point. Okay?
Right.
Should we continue?
If you want, you're the chairman.
Building area and impervious coverage. Okay. The existing PI is 30%. I don't understand this one. Someone else do this one.
What they're saying about the impervious is that it can't exceed 45% unless it already does, which it does.
But it says 30, 50, and 60.
That's the building part, Regina.
That's building coverage.
Yeah, go up one. Figure
Oh,
that one out.
Wait, where are you?
No,
where are you-
look on this chart, see?
I'm looking at the ordinance.
I know, but I want to ask a question about building or permanent structure coverage. Is that, can you find that in the ordinance?
Yeah, the chart's kind of ugly. Maybe the ordinance is better on that one.
On that one?
As Regina said, you're looking at, it's B, building area 2B, and it says not more than 45% of the lot area may be covered, provided, however, the impervious may be equal but not exceed the existing impervious, but no event shall exceed 45% for the entire campus, which is the current requirement. So you can't, like, say that, you know, you can't increase it here and then get credit for it throughout campus. So it's still that 45% throughout campus.
But that's the impervious coverage. What
That's
about
the impervious.
What about the
building
building
coverage is 30%.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay, and then, and, you know, I struggled with this language. So if Peter comes up with better language, you know, that's fine. And then we said it can be increased if you have an impervious coverage at the time that exceeds 60%. I was just trying to somehow limit it, but also try to achieve the purpose.
That's back to the density issue. That's a huge density increase. And so far in the ordinance, there's no compensation in terms of anything else.
I understand.
I mean, maybe a compensation is that the impervious elsewhere on the campus drops from 45 to 40 or something like that. I mean, something that's fair, but...
Okay, but in your sketch plan, you're at 40.28%, and that's the dormitories, the arts center, and the parking garage. Is that correct?
And I'm going to have to turn the
It says
engineers
just
on that. Did you
dormitory.
hear that, Alex? Yes, the garage issue again. I think because of the garage,
Is
it
that-
it
But we
balances
said-
up. Because remember, we had building coverage. Is the garage a building or not? Currently, under our current code, it's not a building.
Yeah, but in my mind it is.
Well, I know. And that's why we kind of covered that in
But
here.
that
because I know that's what we were
40.28, does
talking
that
about.
include the garage in your sketch plan?
The 40.2 is all the buildings, including the garage as a structure. If we just talk about the dormitory and the PAC, which is what the building is defined as today, it's less than the 30 at the 23.
Okay, so my point is that if their current sketch plan is showing 40%, I don't want to say 60%
Or 50, or 50.
or 50%. Right, exactly. Well,
Julia,
let's say
Julia, this-
42, and it gives them some leeway.
Julia, the 60 is existing impervious. That 60 is not in any way,
Okay.
yeah.
I would like to give a little less leeway, but I don't want to go below 40. Let's do 45 for tonight. Okay. 45 for that one? Thank you. That's perfect.
What about impervious?
And we already talked about impervious. Is everybody good with that? Because it's so impervious now, you know. All right.
Well-
Okay, we're turning the page. It's very exciting.
Wait, now what's the number on impervious then, since we already talked about it?
We're good with
We're
what
good
they
with
had.
we're good with 71, because that's what it's going to be. In the design plan, it's 71%.
Yeah, because the existing is 88.
Right, so we're giving credit for grandfathered.
Yeah.
Do we want that? No, well,
I don't know.
You know, this is
Peter,
such a
can you come
unique
back to us
thing.
with a recommendation about that?
Would it
Yes.
be,
Well- How
would
to
it be
word the
advisable
impervious
to
coverage.
say that you're going to decrease it 10% because they already do in their plan?
For the impervious surface?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Would you guys be okay with that? I'm sorry. We're saying you give more than a 10% reduction, so why don't we just say we're requiring 10% reduction in impervious cover?
In the CICD.
Since you're that shouldn't tie your hands at all.
Yeah, I think the only
So
the
it makes it more palatable.
The only problem could be is if, PennDOT came back with a lot of road improvements and a lot of turning lanes and things, that's going to eat into the impervious surface. So, I don't know how much there.
Does that get included? Remember we had some issues with that
we've
in the past?
adopted, I believe we have adopted a change that now includes the roads as impervious surface. Or if not, it's been proposed. And yeah.
Because I think right now it's...
I know. Let's put it this way. I've written it. I've handed it to John. Sooner or later, I'm going to hear, yes, it's been adopted.
Yeah, because I think right now it's gross lot area is your denominator.
Right.
And then your numerator is the impervious, not counting the impervious.
Not counting, and we've changed it to the numerator will count the road impervious.
So I guess it's safer to leave it.
Leave it right away, yes. Yeah.
Not the whole road, just that portion
Right,
of
yes,
the road.
yeah.
And keep in mind that 10% reduction you're asking for would be site-specific for this, but this ordinance could also be applied to other places.
Well, that's why we want the 10% in there, is so that if it is applied somewhere else, that we're not opening a door too wide.
Yeah, but it may be another site that doesn't have the amount of impervious that they have to reduce.
However, if it's exceeding whatever the 45% allowable.
Yeah, I mean, we can put a base figure, of, let's say 45%. If the existing impervious exceeds that, they're allowed to reduce it to.
Do we want to say 5%? I mean, do we?
Whatever you want.
What number will work and still allow a little leeway? That's what I guess. You really think that we're going to have a significant road widening on this?
Well, I don't know. Two things. I don't know how much they're proposing to make that number of 70.85%. One. And two, I don't know how much more road widening could possibly be proposed. I just throw that out there because I like throwing monkey wrenches into things.
Thank you, Peter.
I try.
It's not a big issue, but if it's easily
let's just make a note of
incorporated,
it and-
let's do it. If
Yeah.
it's going to be presenting a problem,
We'll
then
figure
we'll
it out
throw
later.
it out.
All right. I want to do one more section at least tonight. Let's jump to the heights, because I think we actually have less trouble here than in some of the other areas. The current proposal is 55 foot with 5 stories, maximum, average of 45 feet, parking garage at 38, performing arts center, 5 stories at a 60-foot max, and then there's that weird fly loft thing. An average of all buildings is 50. Now, apart from the fly loft, is everybody comfortable with those numbers?
Yes.
Good. See, we just got through that whole section.
I don't know if everybody
almost.
else said yes. I said yes.
Yeah, I heard some yeses down here. I heard some yeses down here. Okay. I want to defer the fly loft thing because I don't really know what it looks like.
My quick comment about that height thing, though, is I would not support it. As Peter says, put notes on your vote. I would not support it unless there is some other way to reduce density elsewhere on the campus, whether it's...
The offsets that Regina was talking
yes,
about? Okay.
And I'd prefer to see it actually in the ordinance as opposed to something that gets negotiated.
Okay.
I second that
And
one.
that's what Regina said. We agreed with that. Okay, building length and spacing. I think the biggest problem we're going to have here is the 350. Well, there's several 350s. That's huge.
One quick question. Now, if some of this is written specifically for the parking garage, can we split it? Can we split it, buildings that are for parking and buildings that are residential?
Yes, you can do
so
that.
that we don't have this,
So we all know what we're
number
talking
that
about.
we're not happy with. Does that work? Can we split that up?
Sure. In fact, here it says residence buildings, and there's a section for the parking garage and a section for the performing arts center. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the table. Get on board.
I'm making recommendations on the ordinance, so that's what I keep looking at. So in the ordinance itself, why don't we make it match that table? Does that make sense?
Doesn't the ordinance match the table?
You know, I'm looking at it right now as we're talking, and I think
Is there
that I have
a
350
discrepancy?
down for everything, which would be a building, the dorms, and...
Yeah, that's where, if we can split that, would it be easier for you to come back with that language, since we're all on the same
I mean,
page?
Yeah, we're only talking about the parking structure for that 350. I mean, the dorms, I think, were 180, I believe.
It depends how you want to define building also.
Well, we know that, yeah.
Because
But they want to define a parking structure as a building, even though it's not
No,
defined
I'm
that
talking
way, but...
about the dorm, because the dorms have all those.
Right, notches,
balanced
yeah.
shapes. Overall, you know, one corner could be 500 feet, but you've got all
Right,
this
yeah.
interruption.
And they're okay with that.
And we're okay with that, totally.
So if you can just define what you have, or give yourself some conservative definition of that, where you have some leeway, then I think we're all good on that one.
Nick, I have a question here. When I brought up that 2-foot thing offset at a 90 degree.
I don't think we need that.
Well, here you have an asterisk referring to that, but you have it on the residence and the parking garage and the performing arts center.
But you meant that for the parking garage, right?
But you have the same asterisks on all that for the.
Because the language in here covers everything like an umbrella. So we're going to break it
So
up,
you're going to break that out.
so that we don't have to worry about that anymore.
All right.
Okay, I would just like to say I still think that's big for a parking garage. I mean, what's normal?
So the problem with the
I don't
parking structure, just to let you know why we need that length, if we don't have that length, then we got to go up. And we're trying to get away from going up.
But, you know,
Can you design a parking garage that's at that low height, has the bulk, but has some ins and outs, so it's not, 350 feet?
you know,
Yeah, with cost of parking spots.
I'm okay with that.
Cabrini came to us with one giant structure,
Right. And they divided into two, I remember.
and the other structure is a garage. So you have the surface parking behind the buildings near Church Walk. That could be a 2-story structure, too. A lot of money, though, and maybe aesthetically. Okay.
Remember, this whole thing was to avoid...
Yeah, I know, the buffer, and yeah. Well, is there another area of campus you could move a little bit of parking?
Well, we already did. We put on...
Yes,
I
of
mean,
course there is.
a little more parking?
We already put levels on 2 of the parking spots.
I understand, but maybe, a little more.
Perhaps you want to put underground parking underneath your performing arts center and make the arts center twice as big.
They're building a Target in King of Prussia with parking under the
Well,
entire
just
building.
for our discussion
so.
here tonight, I want to make the point that I think the parking garage is too big for the site. I think that's why we're having the problem with the setbacks. Maybe that's a good size for a parking garage. I'm not even sure of that. But I think when I look at the sketch plan, it looks too big. We may have taken care of that with the setbacks, but that's something we're going to have to talk about some more.
I guess, are we asking them to revisit the size?
It sounds
and
like they
what
don't
could
want
actually
to,
work?
so-
Are you minimal right now? This is your minimum that you can make?
This is the minimum we can make.
You can't- you can't-
If we narrow that down, we got to go up, which, unless you want to put a level on it, which we've kind of been avoiding.
So we might
To
want to
do.
think about
I
that.
think I
We
would
don't have to negotiate with
personally
it.
myself, I would rather keep it as is, but maybe everyone wants to ring in on that so that they know how to. Would you rather go up and be a smaller footprint, or would you rather stay low with the footprint that's there? I say, for me, I'd rather stay low.
Okay, but we don't have to negotiate with ourselves.
No, but I'm saying maybe we
The
should give that
yeah.
direction.
And
Yes.
Julie, just so you know, the direction from the township before was lower that. Because that's the one, you're getting, it's a parking structure, one. It's not a
You got
performing
this
arts center. It
from
has no
staff
architectural
But then you
direction.
create such
Okay.
a long line of that building. I mean, the visual impact of that without any nooks and crannies it's horrible.
I don't know if you're going to see most of the side of it, though, because the Performing Arts Center will block it, and then South Campus will block it.
It's
So
not
you'll
right
just
on the
see the
road,
short
but you'll
side
still
of it.
see it.
Yeah, it's a little bit. You're only, you're
Yeah.
seeing it for 350 feet, basically. is what
Okay,
you're seeing
but
it
that's
for.
the sketch plan, and we're talking about the ordinance. If you move that to Lancaster, we're going to see it.
We're not going to, yeah, remember we have a 120-foot setback.
Okay,
there.
if you're comfortable with that, I'm fine. Okay, we are going to have to wrap up. Does anybody want to point out anything specifically they have a strong comment to make on before we wrap up for tonight?
The comment I made about the retail, what was your wording you were
We
putting
were
in there?
going to look at some percentage to limit the retail, because right now we're saying primarily, and there's no limitation on it, so we'll have to come up with a limitation.
Okay.
A percentage limitation.
And
Because that might cut back on some of the footprint of the dorm building too, a little, or what's sticking out front. Because I noticed on the design, the retail is all in the front area.
Yeah, that one area, that little square area by the, by Ithan, I think that's the bistro. If you see that area that comes out, that little cube, I think that the intent for that was the bistro, just because obviously it's a great location for it.
Okay.
I have a question. I just want to clarify something. The retail area that's shown on the plans,
I can't hear
is
you.
that's just retail on the first floor, and then there's dorm above it?
And
Okay,
maybe
thanks.
perhaps-
Sorry, I can't hear you.
And that's the other thing too, is retail is just to be on the first floor, and maybe
Yeah,
that's
bring that up.
another,
Exactly.
we could put in, spell that out. Yeah.
Okay, Doug had one thing?
Very last thing is buffer planning. It says you shall not be required. I think we ought to, like along the train tracks, we ought to require it.
I'm sorry.
Or the very end of the thing talks about buffer planting strip. It says no buffer planting strip or screening shall be required along any property line.
You know, what we were intending to do anyway was put the plan, and I think the Aldwin neighbors, which were really the ones affected by this, would prefer it being on the Aldwin area, on the Aldwin side of the tracks. So that was our intent anyway in land development, is put that buffering on the Aldwin side of the tracks, so the opposite side of the tracks from Villanova, because our understanding is that's kind of where the neighbors wanted it too, instead of on the Villanova side, kind of put it closer to them.
How can we put that in here so it would fit for other places? Because you own on the other side of the right-of-way. So as long as there is buffering, and I understand the concept on it, it makes sense, but how do we write it so that it fits for other institutions?
You know,
Can I say either? You could give an option, I guess.
Either or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nick, what it seems that we're doing is largely trying to create a middle ground thing where you don't have to ask for a waiver. And maybe here and there, like this one little thing here where you have a perfectly logical reason to ask for the waiver because the neighbors want it on that particular side of the R100, maybe we leave it the way it is in PI. And then you just ask for that
Yes,
waiver.
in the PI actually doesn't provide for any buffering on a non-residential area.
Well, your chart says it does, but okay.
Oh, does it? Okay. No. Okay. Similar, yeah. Okay. And Julie, we just request next time, we'll have a vote, okay? Please.
I'm sorry, is there any additional public comment?
Yes, thank you, Jim Schneller. If I could just comment on the determinations you just made. You've really varied wildly from the existing requirements, and I don't think you've kept the regard for the comments made about density at all. So when you write the recommendations, please use all leeway possible to say why you went up from 30 to 60, and decisions in that regard so the Board of Commissioners knows that you considered the comfort, safety, health, and welfare.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Thank you. Skip, can you review what we just talked about, not voted on, but discussed, so that everybody has the right spots?
So that everyone, and staff, this is your chance. I'll give you a copy anyway now. Setbacks, residential buildings 50 feet from curb line. Parking garage as set forth in the CICD. Performing arts center 50 feet from curb line. Surface parking 60 feet from curb line. Residential buildings, Ithan setback 50 feet from curb line. Parking garage 35 feet from curb line. Although that can be crafted in some way to allow a minimal percentage, we're looking to you for guidance for whatever it's an elevator or a stairwell or something can be closer than that. Performing Arts Center, 60 feet from curb line. Surface parking, 60 feet from curb line. R100 right-of-way. Residences bordering, 60 feet from R100 right-of-way. Bordering that special R3 district that is already a parking lot in the CICD or is in, there's no houses there, 60 feet. Parking garage, 20 feet from the R100, unless it has to be greater because of safety concerns. Surface parking, 0. Surface parking in the R3 special little area, 0. Performing Arts Center, 60 feet. In the building or permanent structure coverage area, 45% is what we came up with, I think.
Yeah, Peter's going to get back to us on the building.
And impervious coverage, we debated adopting the 70.85% or a 10% reduction in the overall impervious. You pointed out concerns about right-of-way determinations. You'll get back to us. We provisionally said we were more or less okay with the heights of the buildings, but a number of people on the board are very concerned about some way to guarantee that density won't pop up again on some other portion of campus. So maybe some permanent non-developed property or open space or a hybrid of both. And then we kind of stopped, except we began to talk about building dimensions. We agreed that the parking garage could be larger. I don't know that we did anything about the residences, except that we understood that the current plan could be interpreted to be 180 feet. But so I think that we didn't really reach a conclusion on that.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
I'm sorry. Just
go ahead,
so
Nick.
I know. It sounds to me like, Peter, are you going to draft something? Is that where we're going with this? Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Can I get a
I
motion?
just want to know if I was supposed to do it or if you were supposed to do it. So I guess you're going to review everything and then incorporate their comments into a draft.
Well, you're going to.
Your side of it was splitting up.
There's a couple things you're going to work on.
Correct, yeah. And
I'll
I'm
just
going
communicate with
to go
him.
through the whole thing along with Roger. We're going to incorporate what they discussed tonight, and then we're going to comment on the rest of the ordinance also.
And then I'll communicate with you the couple items that they gave me.
Yeah, if you and I can get on the same page or agree to disagree, then before we come here, that'd be good.
Okay.
So we're going to change the ordinance to reflect the numbers that we came up with tonight, not just the chart, but the ordinance too?
Right, and then we'll discuss it again.
Okay.
Next meeting after we've thought about it some more. And,
Okay.
They'll also have 2 more possibly people voting too.
right, and then we want to hear from them. Can I get a motion to table? So moved. Second? Second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Is there any old or new business? Okay, we're adjourned. Oh, I'm sorry. We do not have another meeting this week. Does somebody over there know the date of our next meeting in May? Okay, May 6th at 7 o'clock is our next meeting. And I believe there will only be one meeting that week also.
Right. So that means that meeting is more work on PI again with Charlie.
Right.
And whatever else is coming up.
And this.
This.
And also there's a development coming in. Do you want to go back to having 2 meetings? Do you feel that that's too much
Was
to
that
cover?
the plan, that Charlie was going to come to our regular meeting?
No, but we were going to discuss it. Charlie was not going to be at the next meeting, but we
We
were
are
going to
just going
discuss
to do our
it at
own
that
discussion.
meeting. But if you think that's too much for one meeting, we could reconsider having a second meeting that week due to the fact that obviously this is going to be another major issue.
Do PI and Villanova and a subdivision in one meeting?
Well,
not gonna
that's
make
where
it.
it's headed, and I'm saying maybe we should reconsider.
Well, maybe not in the same week, because if Charlie's not coming, we can do it on a regular Monday night.
Well, I think there's a problem. You got double problems with, one, most of us professionals have numerous other clients in evening, so it's kind of hard to get us all on the same night. And then also Radnor has several meetings where this room is being used. I think the second Thursday was agreed to not, Charlie can make it, but not only that, the rest of us can make it, and the room was available. So I think...
Second Thursday, or is it?
I mean, the first Thursday of the month.
Yeah, see, why did we ever decide it would be in the same week?
Okay, I think that we probably should look into rescheduling that meeting on the Thursday, because I really don't think we can do both of these things in one meeting.
Right, and we'll have to re-advertise that,
And see if the room's available and
All that good
whatever it
stuff.
is you do. But let
Well,
us know.
I think the meeting, I think the Thursday meeting has been advertised for the year.
Yes.
Okay.
It's on the schedule, so.
It's on the schedule, you don't have to
We
re-advertise.
can always cancel it, but, yeah.
See how it goes, and if we don't need it, we don't have it.
That's right, Charlie's not going to be here, so if we
Right.
end up
So-
getting through quicker than we think, we'll do it.
Then we can do it. So let's keep
All
it
right.
on the agenda, right? Keep it on the agenda
Right.
for the first night for PI discussion. No, next month.
No, we're not meeting this week again. We're meeting next month.
So as part of our regular meeting, you'll be here anyway.
But you'll be at the top of the agenda. Well, maybe not the top,
Now-
in the middle.
Julie, if our regular planning commission's on the 6th, the first Thursday of the month would be the 2nd, which would be before the planning commission meeting. So we could, if you had that,
Maybe we should go ahead and do the
PI.
PI on the 2nd then.
We'll
Although
shoot for
now
the
that
9th.
it occurs to me, Susan and I will not be here because there's a concert at the middle school. Who else is in middle school? Okay. I think then what we should do is, I would recommend that we go ahead with our meeting on the 8th. See if we can get the 6th, sorry. See if we can get to it, and if we can't, we're just going to have to do it later.
Get to what?
See if we can get to PI.
Okay. So we're just planning on Villanova and whatever the other
Yeah,
subdivision
there's a
is.
subdivision coming in.
That's even going to be tight.
And I think in fairness to the two applicants, that PI is definitely in the third spot, too.
Yeah.
We'll set the agenda up that way then, for the chair.
Okay. Is everybody good with that?
Yep.
All right,
Quick
thank you
question-
all.
Quick
We are
question for
adjourned.
staff, when is Kevin back?
Middle of May.
Middle, okay.
All right, thank you.